Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Tonight, I want to tell you a story that's been weighing on my mind, a story about a young woman named Sydney Powell, whose life changed forever on a September morning in 2020. This isn't just another true crime case. This is a story about the pressure we put on our children, the weight of expectations, and how quickly a family argument can spiral into unimaginable tragedy. It happened in North Canton, Ohio, a place that could be any of our hometowns, to a family that could be any of our neighbors. I've spent weeks researching this case, reading court documents, listening to testimony, trying to understand how a 19-year-old college student could commit such a brutal act against the person who loved her most. What I discovered is a story that's both deeply disturbing and profoundly human, a reminder that sometimes the people we think we know best are capable of things we never could have imagined. So settle in, let the rain sounds wash over you, and prepare yourself for a journey into one of Ohio's most shocking recent crimes. This is the story of Sydney Powell, her mother Brenda, and the college suspension that led to murder. To understand the Sydney Powell case, you first have to understand North Canton, Ohio. It's the kind of place where people still wave to strangers, where the local high school's homecoming parade draws half the town, and where families like the Powells have lived for generations without ever making headlines. North Canton sits in Stark County, about an hour south of Cleveland. It's what real estate agents like to call family-friendly, tree-lined streets, well-maintained parks, and the kind of suburban quiet that makes you forget the chaos of the outside world. The median household income hovers around $65,000 a year, solidly middle class, the kind of place where parents work hard to give their kids opportunities they never had. I drove through North Canton last month while researching this story, and I was struck by how normal everything looked. The houses are modest but well kept, mostly built in the 1970s and 80s when the American dream still felt attainable for families like the Powells. There's a Walmart, a few local restaurants, and that unmistakable feeling of a community where everybody knows everybody else's business. The Powell family lived on a quiet residential street, the kind where children ride bicycles and neighbors borrow cups of sugar from each other. Their house was nothing special, a two-story colonial with beige siding and a small front porch. The kind of house that represents stability, normalcy, the American middle class at its most ordinary. But as we all know, the most ordinary places can hide the most extraordinary secrets. And on September 2, 2020, the quiet suburban peace of North Canton would be shattered by an act of violence so brutal that it would make national headlines and leave investigators struggling to understand how such a thing could happen in such a place. To understand what happened that September morning, you have to understand Brenda Powell. She was 50 years old when she died, but in many ways, she was still fighting the same battles she'd been fighting her whole life, trying to give her daughter a better life than she'd had, trying to make sure Sydney didn't make the same mistakes, trying to be the kind of mother she wished she'd had. Brenda wasn't born into privilege. She'd grown up in rural Ohio, in a family where money was always tight and opportunities were few. She'd watched her own dreams get deferred, then abandoned, as life's responsibilities piled up. But like so many parents, she'd channeled all of her unfulfilled ambitions into her daughter's future. Those who knew Brenda described her as intensely devoted to Sydney's success. She'd worked multiple jobs to pay for Sydney's college tuition, sacrificing her own comforts to make sure her daughter had every advantage. Friends said she would talk for hours about Sydney's potential, about the career she was going to have, about how proud she was that her daughter was going to be the first in their family to graduate from college. But Brenda's devotion came with a price, the kind of pressure that can feel suffocating to a young person trying to find their own way in the world. She'd call Sydney multiple times a week to check on her grades, her social life, her future plans. She'd drive the 45 minutes to the University of Mount Union unannounced, just to make sure Sydney was staying on track. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a family therapist I spoke with who specializes in parent-child relationships, explained it this way: when parents invest everything they have, financially, emotionally, psychologically, into their child's success, it creates an enormous burden for that child. The child begins to feel like they're not just responsible for their own future, but for validating their parents' entire life. Brenda's friends say she meant well. She'd grown up without support, without someone pushing her to achieve more, and she was determined not to let Sydney make the same mistakes she had. But good intentions don't always translate into healthy relationships, and the pressure Sydney felt to live up to her mother's expectations was becoming overwhelming. In the weeks leading up to her death, Brenda had been increasingly worried about Sydney's performance at Mount Union. She'd received a few concerning calls from professors, hints that Sydney was struggling academically. But Brenda wasn't prepared for just how badly things had deteriorated, or how devastating the news would be when she finally learned the truth. The University of Mount Union is a small private college in Alliance, Ohio, about 45 minutes from North Canton. It's the kind of school that markets itself as providing a personalized education experience, small class sizes, close relationships with professors, the promise that every student matters. For Sydney Powell, Mount Union represented everything her mother had dreamed of: higher education, social mobility, a path to a better life. But by her sophomore year, Sydney was drowning under the weight of those expectations. I spoke with several students who knew Sydney during her time at Mount Union, and they painted a picture of a young woman who was struggling to find her place. She wasn't naturally academic. She'd been an average student in high school who'd gotten into Mount Union more through persistence than brilliance. The coursework was challenging, and Sydney found herself falling behind almost immediately. She was always stressed, one former classmate told me. She'd talk about how much pressure she felt from her mom, how she couldn't disappoint her. It was like she was carrying the weight of her entire family's hopes on her shoulders. Academic pressure wasn't Sydney's only challenge. She was also struggling socially, trying to fit in with students who came from more privileged backgrounds. Mount Union's tuition runs about $35,000 a year, a fortune for a family like the Powells. While her classmates worried about which internship to take or which graduate school to attend, Sydney was working part-time jobs and constantly stressed about money. The social media posts from Sydney's college years tell a story of a young woman trying desperately to project success while privately falling apart. Photos of her smiling with friends, captions about loving college life, the kind of performative happiness that's become so common among young people today. But those who knew her well say she was increasingly isolated, anxious, and overwhelmed. By the spring of 2020, Sydney's grades had fallen to the point where she was placed on academic probation. The COVID-19 pandemic had made everything worse: remote learning, social isolation, the general anxiety that was affecting everyone. Sydney's already precarious academic standing became critical. What Sydney didn't tell her mother was just how bad things had gotten. She'd been missing classes, failing assignments, and barely maintaining the minimum GPA required to stay enrolled. She kept hoping she could turn things around, that she could fix her grades before her mother found out. But by September 2020, time had run out. I want you to imagine September 2, 2020, in North Canton, Ohio. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind of early fall day when summer is clearly ending but winter still feels far away. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and there was that crisp feeling in the air that makes you think of new beginnings, fresh starts, the promise of change. Brenda Powell woke up that morning with no idea that it would be her last day alive. She followed her usual routine: coffee, checking the news, probably scrolling through Facebook to see what her friends were up to. She was wearing a simple outfit, jeans and a comfortable shirt, the kind of clothes you wear when you're planning to stay home and get things done around the house. Meanwhile, at the University of Mount Union, administrators were making the calls they'd been dreading. Sydney Powell's academic standing had deteriorated to the point where suspension was inevitable. It wasn't a decision they made lightly. They'd given her multiple warnings, opportunities to improve, extensions and second chances. But eventually, even the most patient institution has to enforce its standards. At approximately 11:30 a.m., an administrator from Mount Union's registrar's office placed a call to Brenda Powell's home phone. These calls are never easy, telling a parent that their child has been suspended from college, explaining the financial implications, the impact on future enrollment, the steps required for possible readmission. The administrator who made that call, let's call her Mrs. Henderson, later testified that Brenda's reaction was immediate and intense. There was shock, then anger, then a kind of desperate questioning about what could be done, whether the decision could be reversed, whether there were any options left. She kept asking if there was anything she could do, Mrs. Henderson testified. She wanted to know if she could pay extra, if Sydney could take summer classes, if there was any way to fix this. I could hear the desperation in her voice. This wasn't just about college for her, this represented everything she'd worked for. What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that while she was explaining the details of Sydney's suspension to Brenda, Sydney herself was driving home from campus. She'd been summoned to a meeting with academic advisors that morning, where she'd been officially informed of her suspension. The meeting had been brief and professional, but Sydney left campus knowing that her worst fears were about to be realized. She would have to face her mother with this devastating news. The drive from Mount Union to North Canton takes about 45 minutes under normal circumstances. For Sydney, it must have felt like both an eternity and no time at all. She knew this conversation with her mother was inevitable, but she had no plan for how to handle it, no strategy for managing the disappointment and anger she knew was coming. Picture this scene: Brenda Powell is in her living room, still on the phone with the university administrator, learning for the first time the full extent of her daughter's academic failures. The conversation has been going on for about 15 minutes, and Brenda is becoming increasingly upset as the reality of the situation sinks in. The financial implications alone were staggering. The Powells had already paid thousands of dollars for Sydney's education, money they couldn't afford to lose. Brenda had been making sacrifices for years, working extra shifts, skipping vacations, putting off repairs to their house, all so Sydney could have the college experience she'd never had. Then Sydney walked through the front door. Mrs. Henderson, still on the phone, later testified that she heard the door open and close, heard Brenda say something like, "She's here now," and then heard voices in the background. The conversation between mother and daughter started immediately, and it was clear that emotions were running high. What exactly was said in those first few minutes may never be fully known, but court testimony and evidence would later paint a picture of a confrontation that escalated quickly beyond anything either woman had experienced before. Sydney later told investigators that her mother was angrier than she'd ever seen her. The disappointment was crushing, but it was the financial implications that seemed to push Brenda over the edge. She'd sacrificed everything for Sydney's education, and now it felt like that sacrifice had been for nothing. "You've ruined everything," Brenda allegedly said, according to Sydney's initial statement to police. "Do you have any idea what I've given up for you? Do you understand what this means?" Sydney, for her part, felt cornered and defensive. She'd been dreading this moment for months, and now that it was happening, she felt overwhelmed by shame, guilt, and a growing sense of panic. The weight of her mother's disappointment, combined with her own fear about the future, created a psychological pressure cooker that was about to explode. Dr. Robert Chen, a forensic psychologist who has studied family violence, explained to me how quickly these situations can escalate. When you have two people who are both feeling desperate, both feeling like their entire world is collapsing, rational thinking goes out the window. The fight-or-flight response kicks in, and sometimes that response can turn violent. The argument continued for several minutes, with both women saying things they'd never said to each other before. Mrs. Henderson, still on the phone, testified that she could hear the conversation becoming more heated, but she had no idea what was about to happen. Then something shifted. Sydney later told police that she felt like she was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on her. Her mother's anger, her own shame, the weight of all those expectations, it all became too much to bear. In a moment that would haunt investigators and court officials for years to come, Sidney Powell walked to the kitchen and picked up an iron skillet. The investigation into Brenda Powell's murder was, in many ways, straightforward. There was no mystery about who had killed her, no complex web of motives to unravel, no forensic puzzles to solve. Sidney Powell had brutally murdered her mother in a moment of rage, and the evidence was overwhelming. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who led the investigation, told me that in her 20 years of police work, she'd never seen a crime scene that affected her quite like the Powell house. It wasn't just the violence, she said. It was the ordinary nature of everything else. This looked like any family's home: photos on the mantel, dishes in the sink, a grocery list on the refrigerator. And in the middle of all that normalcy was this incredibly brutal crime. The physical evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened. Blood spatter analysis confirmed Sidney's account of the attack. The weapons, the skillet and knife, were found at the scene with Sidney's fingerprints clearly visible. There was no indication that anyone else had been involved, no sign of a struggle before the attack began. But while the physical evidence was clear, understanding the psychological factors that led to such violence would prove much more complex. Sidney was initially uncommunicative with investigators, appearing to be in a state of shock that lasted for several days. Dr. Amanda Foster, a clinical psychologist who evaluated Sidney after her arrest, described her mental state as profoundly dissociated. She seemed unable to fully comprehend what she had done, Dr. Foster explained. She would refer to the attack in the third person, as if she was describing something she had watched happen to someone else. The community of North Canton struggled to make sense of what had happened. The Powells had seemed like such an ordinary family, no history of domestic violence, no prior police calls to their address, no red flags that might have predicted such a tragedy. "You always wonder if there were warning signs you missed," said Janet Morrison, a neighbor who had known the Powells for years. "But looking back, I honestly can't think of anything that would have made me think something like this could happen. They seemed like a normal mother and daughter. They had their disagreements, like any family, but nothing that would make you think it could lead to murder." The investigation also revealed the financial pressure the family had been under. Bank records showed that Brenda had been working multiple jobs and had taken out several loans to pay for Sidney's education. The family was struggling financially, and Sidney's suspension represented not just an academic failure, but a financial catastrophe. Sidney Powell's path through the criminal justice system would prove to be almost as complex and troubling as the crime itself. Initially charged with aggravated murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence, Sidney faced the possibility of life in prison without parole. The case seemed straightforward to prosecutors. The evidence was overwhelming, the brutality of the crime was undeniable, and there appeared to be no mitigating circumstances that would justify such violence. Assistant District Attorney Michael Thompson, who prosecuted the case, told me that he'd never handled a more clear-cut murder case. But Sidney's defense team, led by attorney Sarah Williams, argued that their client's mental state at the time of the crime should be taken into consideration. They presented evidence of Sidney's history of anxiety and depression, her struggles with academic pressure, and what they described as a complete psychological breakdown that led to the attack. This wasn't a premeditated murder, Williams argued in court. This was a young woman who snapped under unbearable pressure. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it should inform how we respond to it. The trial began in September 2023, nearly 3 years after the murder. Those 3 years had been difficult for everyone involved. Sidney spent the time in jail, largely cut off from the outside world, undergoing psychological evaluation and treatment. The community of North Canton struggled to heal from the trauma of such a brutal crime happening in their midst. During the trial, prosecutors presented a methodical case that emphasized the brutality of the attack and the lack of any justification for such violence. They argued that while Sidney may have been upset about her academic situation, millions of students face similar pressures without resorting to murder. The defense, meanwhile, focused on Sidney's mental health history and the extreme psychological pressure she had been under. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the effects of academic stress on young adults, the pressure faced by first-generation college students, and the complex dynamics of mother-daughter relationships. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching their verdict. Sidney Powell was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For many in the community, justice had finally been served. But the legal journey was far from over. In December 2024, the Ohio Court of Appeals overturned Sidney's conviction, citing issues with how the case had been handled at the trial level. The appellate court found that there had been problems with jury selection, questions about the adequacy of Sidney's legal representation, and concerns about whether her mental health had been properly evaluated. The decision to overturn the conviction sent shockwaves through North Canton and raised difficult questions about the criminal justice system's ability to handle cases involving young defendants with mental health issues. As of the time of this recording, the Sidney Powell case remains unresolved. Prosecutors have appealed the decision to overturn her conviction to the Ohio Supreme Court, arguing that justice for Brenda Powell requires that her daughter be held accountable for her brutal murder. "We cannot allow the legal system to be manipulated by defendants who commit horrific crimes and then claim mental health issues as an excuse," said District Attorney Robert Martinez, who has made the Powell case a priority for his office. "Brenda Powell deserves justice, and we will continue fighting until we get it." But Sidney's new legal team argues that the appellate court made the right decision in overturning her conviction. They claim that Sidney never received adequate legal representation during her original trial, and that her mental health issues were not properly considered by the court. Sidney Powell was a 19-year-old girl who suffered a complete psychological breakdown, said attorney David Chen, who now represents Sidney. "She needs treatment, not just punishment." The original trial failed to adequately consider the complex mental health issues that led to this tragedy. The case has become a lightning rod for debates about criminal justice reform, mental health treatment, and how the legal system should handle cases involving young defendants. Some argue that Sidney's age and mental health issues should result in a more rehabilitative approach to justice. Others believe that the brutality of her crime demands severe punishment, regardless of her personal circumstances. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a criminologist at Ohio State University who has been following the case, believes it highlights fundamental flaws in how our society handles mental health issues among young adults. "We have a system that places enormous pressure on young people to succeed academically, but we provide very little support when they struggle," she explained. "Then when someone breaks under that pressure, we're surprised and want to punish them rather than address the underlying problems." The ongoing legal battle has been particularly difficult for Brenda Powell's family and friends. They want closure, but they also want justice. Many feel that the focus on Sidney's mental health has overshadowed the fact that an innocent woman was brutally murdered. "Brenda was the victim here," said her sister, Margaret Powell Johnson. "She worked so hard to give Sidney every opportunity, and this is how she was repaid. I understand that Sidney was struggling, but that doesn't excuse what she did to my sister." The Sidney Powell case forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about modern American family life, particularly the pressure we place on our children to succeed academically and professionally. In our achievement-oriented society, college has become not just an opportunity, but an expectation, and for families like the Powells, it represents the primary path to social mobility. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a family therapist who specializes in parent-child relationships, has been studying cases like Sidney's for years. She believes that the intense pressure many families place on academic success can create dangerous psychological dynamics. When parents invest everything, financially, emotionally, psychologically, into their child's academic success, it creates an enormous burden for that child, Dr. Martinez explained. The child begins to feel like they're not just responsible for their own future, but for validating their parents' entire life. That kind of pressure can be devastating for a young person who's already struggling. The Powell case also highlights the mental health crisis facing college students across America. Studies show that rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation among college students have skyrocketed in recent years, with academic pressure being cited as a major contributing factor. We've created a system where young people feel like their entire worth as human beings is tied to their academic performance, said Dr. James Wilson, a psychologist who works with college students. When they struggle academically, they don't just feel like they're failing a class, they feel like they're failing as people. That kind of shame and desperation can lead to very dangerous behaviors. The case has also raised questions about how families communicate about stress, failure, and disappointment. Many experts believe that if Sydney had felt able to talk to her mother about her academic struggles earlier, the tragedy might have been prevented. Families need to create environments where children feel safe admitting their failures and asking for help, said Dr. Lisa Chen, a child psychologist. When children feel like they have to hide their struggles from their parents, it creates a pressure cooker situation that can explode in dangerous ways. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Sidney Powell case is how it demonstrates that violence can erupt anywhere, in any family, under the right circumstances. The Powells seemed like an ordinary family facing ordinary struggles, but those struggles culminated in extraordinary violence. More than 4 years after Brenda Powell's murder, the community of North Canton is still grappling with the aftermath of this tragedy. The quiet suburban neighborhood where the Powells lived has never quite returned to its former sense of security and normalcy. It changed how we think about our neighbors, about the families we thought we knew, said Tom Harrison, who lived 3 houses down from the Powells. You realize that you never really know what's going on behind closed doors, what kind of pressure people are under, what they might be capable of when they're pushed to their breaking point. The local high school has implemented new programs focused on mental health awareness and stress management, partly in response to the Powell case. Guidance counselors now receive specialized training in recognizing signs of extreme academic pressure and family dysfunction. We don't want another family to go through what the Powells went through, said Principal Amanda Foster. We're trying to create an environment where students feel comfortable seeking help when they're struggling, before their problems reach a crisis point. The University of Mount Union has also made changes in how they handle academic suspension cases. They now require additional counseling and family communication before suspension decisions are finalized, hoping to prevent the kind of sudden, devastating news that triggered Sydney's violent reaction. We learned that we can't just make these decisions in a vacuum, said Dr. Robert Martinez, the university's vice president of student affairs. When a student is struggling academically, it affects their entire family. We need to be more thoughtful about how we communicate these situations and what resources we provide. The Powell family home still stands on that quiet North Canton Street, though it has changed hands several times since the murder. New families have moved in, trying to create their own memories in a place marked by tragedy. But neighbors say the house will always be associated with that terrible September morning when their sense of suburban safety was shattered forever. As our journey through the Sidney Powell case comes to an end, I find myself listening to the rain outside my window and thinking about all the questions this story raises, questions about family, about pressure, about the thin line between love and suffocation, between support and burden. Sidney Powell remains in the Ohio correctional system as her legal team continues to fight for a new trial. She's now 24 years old, a young woman who destroyed her own life in the process of taking her mother's. The college student who couldn't handle the pressure of academic failure is now facing a lifetime defined by the most extreme failure imaginable, the murder of the person who loved her most. Brenda Powell is buried in a small cemetery outside North Canton, her grave marked by a simple headstone that describes her as a beloved mother. The woman who worked multiple jobs and sacrificed everything for her daughter's future never got to see what that future might have held. Her dreams died with her on that September morning, killed by the very person she'd been trying to help. The case continues to wind its way through the appeals process, but regardless of the final legal outcome, the fundamental tragedy remains unchanged. A family was destroyed by the weight of expectations, by pressure that became unbearable, by a moment of violence that can never be undone. As you drift off to sleep tonight, listening to the rain that has accompanied our journey through this dark chapter of recent true crime history, I want you to think about the families in your own life, the pressure we all face to succeed, to achieve, to meet expectations that sometimes feel impossible to reach. The rain will continue to fall, as it always does, washing the world clean for another day, another chance, another opportunity to choose compassion over violence, understanding over anger, and hope over despair. In North Canton, Ohio, and in countless communities like it, families are still struggling with the same pressures that destroyed the Powells, still walking that fine line between support and suffocation, between love and burden. Maybe the most important lesson from Sidney Powell's story is not about crime or punishment, but about communication, about creating space for failure, about remembering that behind every achievement and every disappointment is a human being who deserves love and support, not just expectations and pressure. The rain keeps falling, and life keeps moving forward, but some stories, some tragedies, stay with us, reminding us of our shared humanity and our responsibility to take care of each other, especially when the pressure becomes too much to bear. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the Sidney Powell case. If this format resonated with you, be sure to like this video. And, I'm putting it out there, if you're watching this video and haven't subscribed, please consider supporting my channel. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions are what fuel my content creation. Let's build a community together. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 2. This particular story has haunted investigators for over 2 years now. It's a case that began on a quiet Tuesday morning in March 2023, in the picturesque riverside community of Bend, Oregon. A case that would challenge everything we think we know about trust, family, and the secrets people keep. Tonight, we'll journey together through the mysterious disappearance of Dr. Elena Vasquez, a respected pediatric surgeon whose life seemed perfect from the outside. But as we'll discover, nothing is ever quite as it appears. Dr. Elena Vasquez was 38 years old when she vanished. To anyone looking from the outside, she had built what most would consider a dream life in Bend, Oregon. The city, nestled against the stunning backdrop of the Cascade Mountains, had drawn Elena and her husband Marcus there 5 years earlier when she accepted a position at St. Charles Medical Center. Elena was originally from Phoenix, Arizona, where she'd grown up in a close-knit Mexican-American family. Her parents, Roberto and Carmen Vasquez, had immigrated to the United States in the 1970s, working tirelessly to provide opportunities for their children. Elena was their pride and joy, the first in her family to attend college, let alone medical school. She met Marcus Wright during her residency at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Marcus, 3 years older, was completing his MBA at the time, focusing on healthcare administration. Friends described their relationship as a perfect complement: Elena, the passionate, driven surgeon, and Marcus, the steady, supportive partner who managed the practical aspects of their life together. When they moved to Bend, they purchased a stunning contemporary home on Riverside Drive, a winding road that follows the Deschutes River through some of the city's most coveted neighborhoods. The house, worth just over $1.2 million, featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, and a design that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. Elena's colleagues at the hospital describe her as meticulous, compassionate, and utterly dedicated to her young patients. Dr. James Hoffman, the chief of pediatrics, would later tell investigators that Elena was the kind of surgeon who would stay late into the evening, not because she had to, but because she wanted to check on her patients one more time. Marcus had established himself in Bend's business community, working as a consultant for medical practices throughout Central Oregon. He was well-liked, involved in the Rotary Club, and known for his weekend hiking expeditions into the mountains surrounding the city. The couple seemed to embody everything that made Bend attractive to young professionals: outdoor adventure, career success, and a strong sense of community. They attended charity galas, hosted dinner parties, and were regulars at the local farmers market on Saturday mornings. But as investigators would later discover, even the most carefully constructed lives can conceal profound secrets. Elena maintained a close relationship with her family in Phoenix. She spoke with her mother, Carmen, every Tuesday evening without fail. It was a ritual that had continued for over 15 years, through medical school, residency, and marriage. Carmen would later tell police that these conversations were the highlight of her week. On the surface, Elena and Marcus's marriage appeared solid. Friends described them as affectionate with each other, supportive of each other's careers, and united in their love for outdoor activities. They had been trying to start a family for the past 2 years, a fact that Elena had confided to several close friends. Yet even in this seemingly perfect life, there were small cracks that, in hindsight, might have served as warnings of what was to come. Dr. Sarah Chen, Elena's closest friend at the hospital, would later recall that in the months before her disappearance, Elena had seemed more withdrawn than usual. She attributed it to the stress of their fertility struggles and the demanding nature of pediatric surgery. But looking back, Sarah wondered if there had been something more. Elena had also begun taking longer lunch breaks, something uncharacteristic for someone known for her dedication to her patients. When asked about it, she would simply say she needed some air, some time to think. She had started walking along the Deschutes River Trail during these extended breaks, often photographing the wildlife and landscape with her phone. Marcus, meanwhile, had been traveling more frequently for work. His consulting business was growing, taking him to medical practices in Portland, Seattle, and sometimes as far as San Francisco. These trips, which had once been rare, were becoming a weekly occurrence by early 2023. The couple's social media presence painted the picture of a happy, successful partnership. Instagram posts showed them hiking Smith Rock, dining at Ben's trendy restaurants, and spending time with friends. But those who knew Elena well noticed that she had been posting less frequently, and when she did, the captions were shorter, less personal than they once were. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Elena had been working on a particularly challenging case, a 7-year-old boy who required multiple surgeries after a rare congenital heart defect was discovered. The case consumed much of her attention, but colleagues noted that she seemed to approach it with even more intensity than usual, as if the outcome carried extraordinary personal significance. None of this seemed particularly alarming at the time. Elena was known for her perfectionist tendencies, and the stress of challenging cases had always affected her deeply. But in the context of what would happen next, these details would take on new meaning. The last person to see Elena at the hospital was Jennifer Walsh, a surgical nurse who had worked with her for 3 years. Jennifer later told investigators that Elena seemed distracted during their final case together on Monday, March 13, 2023. She made small mistakes that were unlike her, nothing dangerous, but enough to make Jennifer take notice. After the surgery, as they were removing their gloves and masks, Jennifer asked Elena if everything was okay. Elena paused for a long moment before answering, "Sometimes I think about what life would be like if I had made different choices." It was an unusual comment, one that would haunt Jennifer in the days to come. That evening, Elena arrived home to Riverside Drive at her typical time, around 7:30 p.m. Marcus was already there, having returned from a 2-day trip to Portland earlier that afternoon. Neighbors would later confirm seeing both cars in the driveway, Elena's silver BMW and Marcus's black Tesla. The couple ordered takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, Sabai, a detail confirmed by credit card records and the restaurant's delivery logs. The food was delivered at 8:15 p.m. by Tommy Rodriguez, a college student who had made deliveries to the Vasquez Wright household several times before. Tommy would later tell police that both Elena and Marcus came to the door to receive the order, which was not unusual. They seemed normal, maybe a little quiet, but nothing that struck him as odd. Marcus tipped him $20, which was generous but not unprecedented. What happened next, in those final hours before Elena Vasquez disappeared forever, remains one of the central mysteries of this case. Tuesday, March 14, 2023, began like any other morning on Riverside Drive. The March air carried the crisp promise of spring, and the Deschutes River flowed steadily past the expensive homes that lined its banks. Marcus Wright's story, as he would later tell it to police, was straightforward. He woke up at 6:30 a.m., his usual time, expecting to find Elena beside him. Instead, he found an empty bed and a note on her pillow. The note, written in what appeared to be Elena's handwriting on their personal stationery, was brief. "Marcus, I need some time to think about us, about everything. Don't worry about me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Please don't try to find me. E." Marcus told investigators that his first reaction was confusion, then concern. This was completely unlike Elena. In 5 years of marriage, she had never simply disappeared, never failed to communicate her plans. Even during their few serious arguments, she had been direct, preferring to talk through problems rather than avoid them. But the note seemed clear enough, and Marcus convinced himself that Elena was dealing with stress in her own way. He knew she had been under pressure at work, and their ongoing fertility struggles had been weighing on both of them. Perhaps she just needed space. Marcus went about his morning routine, showering and dressing for work. He noticed that Elena's car was gone from the garage, her BMW was nowhere to be seen. Some of her clothes appeared to be missing from their walk-in closet, though he couldn't be specific about exactly what was gone. He decided not to call Elena's phone right away, respecting what seemed to be her request for space. Instead, he left for his office in downtown Bend, a decision he would later question countless times. Meanwhile, at St. Charles Medical Center, Elena's absence was immediately noticed. She was scheduled for 2 surgeries that morning, starting at 7:30 a.m. When she hadn't arrived by 7:45, her surgical team began calling her cell phone. The calls went straight to voicemail. Dr. James Hoffman tried reaching Elena at home, but the call went unanswered. This was unprecedented. In 5 years at the hospital, Elena had never simply failed to show up for scheduled surgeries. She was known for her reliability, often arriving early and staying late. By 9 a.m., the hospital had contacted Marcus at his office. When Dr. Hoffman explained that Elena hadn't shown up for work, Marcus felt his first real stab of alarm. Whatever was happening, Elena would never abandon her patients without explanation. Marcus immediately called Elena's cell phone, but like the hospital staff, he reached only voicemail. He left a message: "Elena, everyone's worried about you. Please call me back and let me know you're okay." The hospital was forced to reschedule Elena's surgeries, a logistical nightmare that affected several families who had been preparing for their children's procedures. Dr. Hoffman later described it as one of the most stressful days of his career, not just because of the scheduling chaos, but because of his growing certainty that something was seriously wrong. Marcus left work immediately and drove home to Riverside Drive. Walking through their house room by room, he tried to piece together what had happened. In Elena's home office, her laptop was missing, along with some personal papers from her desk. The office, usually meticulously organized, showed signs of hasty packing. In their bedroom, Marcus examined the closet more carefully. Elena's suitcase was gone, along with several outfits and personal items. But oddly, many of her favorite clothes remained, including a red dress she had worn to their anniversary dinner just a month earlier. Her jewelry box told a similar story. Some pieces were missing, but others that Marcus knew she treasured, including her grandmother's wedding ring, remained untouched. By early afternoon, Marcus had called Elena's parents in Phoenix. Carmen Vasquez was immediately alarmed. Elena had never missed their Tuesday evening phone call without prior notice, and the idea that she would simply leave without explanation was incomprehensible to her mother. Elena would never do this, Carmen told Marcus over the phone, her voice shaking. "Something is wrong. We need to call the police." Marcus hesitated. The note suggested Elena wanted space, and he was reluctant to violate what seemed to be her explicit wishes. But Carmen's insistence, combined with his own growing anxiety, finally convinced him. At 3:47 p.m. on March 14, 2023, Marcus Wright called the Bend Police Department to report his wife missing. The responding officer was Detective Lisa Park, a 12-year veteran of the force who specialized in missing persons cases. Detective Park's initial assessment was cautious: adults have the right to leave, and the note seemed to indicate Elena's departure was voluntary. But several factors gave her pause. Elena's failure to show up for surgeries without notice was highly unusual for someone in her profession. The missing laptop and papers suggested planning, but the abandoned valuable jewelry was inconsistent with someone preparing for an extended absence. Detective Park began her investigation that evening, starting with Elena's cell phone records. The last activity on Elena's phone had been at 11:43 p.m. on March 13, a text message to her friend Dr. Sarah Chen that simply read, "Thanks for listening today." Dr. Chen was immediately contacted. She told Detective Park that she and Elena had grabbed coffee that afternoon, and Elena had seemed unusually contemplative. They had talked about work, about the stress of their careers, but nothing that seemed to warrant such a cryptic message. "She asked me if I ever wondered what would have happened if I had chosen a different path," Dr. Chen recalled. "I told her that everyone wonders about alternate lives sometimes." She just nodded and changed the subject. Elena's BMW was the next priority. An APB was issued for the vehicle, a 2021 silver BMW X3 with Oregon plates. The car seemed to have vanished as completely as Elena herself. Detective Park spent that first evening interviewing neighbors on Riverside Drive. The street was quiet, with large lots and houses set back from the road. Most residents knew the Vasquez-Wright couple by sight but had little interaction with them beyond friendly waves. However, Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, had noticed Elena's car leaving very early Tuesday morning. Mrs. Thompson, an insomniac, often spent the pre-dawn hours reading by her living room window. "I saw the headlights around 4:30 or 5 a.m., Mrs. Thompson told Detective Park. "It struck me as odd because Elena usually left for work much later." The car was moving slowly, almost hesitantly, down the street. This information was significant. It suggested Elena had left of her own accord, but the early hour and hesitant driving raised questions about her state of mind. As the first day of the investigation concluded, Detective Park found herself with more questions than answers. The evidence seemed to support both the theory that Elena had left voluntarily and the possibility that something more sinister had occurred. The note appeared authentic, and some of Elena's possessions were clearly missing. But the abandoned jewelry, the unprecedented absence from scheduled surgeries, and the early morning departure all suggested a departure made under duress or extreme emotional distress. Marcus Wright was cooperative with the investigation, providing access to Elena's personal items and agreeing to a formal interview the following day. But Detective Park couldn't shake the feeling that there were layers to this story that had yet to be uncovered. As news of Elena's disappearance began to spread through Bend's medical community and beyond, one thing became clear: Dr. Elena Vasquez had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. But someone, somewhere, knew what had really happened on Riverside Drive. And Detective Park was determined to find out who. The first 24 hours of any missing persons case are crucial, and as those hours slipped away, the mystery of Elena Vasquez's disappearance only deepened. The modern world leaves digital traces of nearly everything we do, and Detective Lisa Park knew that Elena Vasquez's electronic footprint might hold the key to understanding her disappearance. But what the investigation uncovered in the digital realm would only deepen the mystery. Elena's laptop, which Marcus confirmed was missing from her home office, had been her primary personal computer. Detective Park obtained a warrant to examine the couple's shared desktop computer, hoping to find clues about Elena's state of mind or plans. The computer's browser history revealed a troubling pattern in the weeks leading up to Elena's disappearance. Starting in early February 2023, someone using the computer had been researching topics that seemed entirely out of character for Elena: how to disappear legally, changing identity documents, and countries without extradition treaties with the United States. More concerning were searches related to domestic violence resources and women's shelters, queries that painted a very different picture of the Vasquez-Wright marriage than the one presented to friends and colleagues. Detective Park immediately brought Marcus in for a more detailed interview. Confronted with the search history, Marcus appeared genuinely shocked. "I had no idea Elena was looking at any of this," he told Detective Park, his voice shaking. "We had our problems, like any married couple, but I never." I would never hurt Elena. I love her. When pressed about what problems he was referring to, Marcus became evasive. He admitted that they had been arguing more frequently about their failed attempts to have children, and that the stress was affecting both of them. But he insisted their disagreements never became physical or abusive. The computer forensics team made another discovery that complicated the picture further. Hidden in a folder deep within the directory structure was a document titled Emergency Plan.docs, created on February 28, 2023, just 2 weeks before Elena's disappearance. The document was encrypted, but the police technical team was eventually able to access it. What they found was a detailed plan for leaving suddenly, including instructions for accessing bank accounts, important phone numbers, and a list of essential documents to take. But perhaps most significant was a handwritten note that had been scanned and saved as part of the document. If something happens to me, look into Marcus's business dealings. Not everything is what it seems. Trust Sarah Chen. Dr. Sarah Chen was immediately contacted again. This time, her interview revealed information that cast the marriage in a very different light. Elena had been asking me about resources for women in difficult situations, Dr. Chen admitted. She was very careful about how she phrased it, always speaking hypothetically, but I got the impression she was asking for herself. Dr. Chen revealed that Elena had confided her suspicions about Marcus's frequent business trips. She said the numbers didn't add up, he was making more money than his client base should support, and he was traveling to places that didn't make sense for medical practice consulting. Elena had also mentioned finding unusual charges on their credit card statements, payments to companies she didn't recognize, and cash withdrawals that Marcus couldn't adequately explain. The last time we spoke, she said she felt like she was living with a stranger, Dr. Chen told Detective Park. She was scared, but she was also trying to protect herself. This revelation prompted a deeper investigation into Marcus Wright's business activities. What authorities discovered would transform the case from a simple missing person investigation into something far more complex. Marcus's consulting business, Wright Medical Solutions, appeared legitimate on the surface. He had contracts with several medical practices throughout the Pacific Northwest, providing administrative and financial consulting services. But a forensic accountant brought in to examine the business records found discrepancies that suggested money laundering. Large cash deposits that didn't correspond to legitimate consulting fees, payments to shell companies, and complex financial transfers that seemed designed to obscure the source of funds. Detective Park contacted the DEA and FBI, agencies that had been tracking suspicious financial activity in the medical industry. What they learned was shocking. Marcus Wright was suspected of being involved in a prescription drug trafficking network that used legitimate medical practices as cover operations. The scheme was sophisticated. Marcus would approach medical practices struggling financially and offer consulting services. Once he gained access to their systems, he would facilitate the overprescribing of opioids and other controlled substances. The excess medications would then be diverted to street dealers, with Marcus taking a substantial cut of the profits. Elena, with her medical background, would have been in a position to recognize the signs of this illegal activity. If she had discovered her husband's involvement in drug trafficking, it would explain her research into disappearing and her apparent fear. But this revelation raised a disturbing question. If Elena had uncovered Marcus's criminal activities, what had he done to silence her? The search for Elena's BMW intensified. Highway patrol officers and local police throughout Oregon, Washington, and California were on alert for the vehicle. But the car seemed to have vanished as completely as its owner. 5 days after Elena's disappearance, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A traffic camera in Portland, Oregon, had captured Elena's BMW driving north on Interstate 5 at 3:17 a.m. on March 15, nearly 24 hours after she was last seen at home. The timestamp was significant because it contradicted Marcus's timeline. He had claimed Elena left early Tuesday morning, but the traffic camera showed her car traveling through Portland in the early hours of Wednesday. More troubling, the camera images showed 2 people in the vehicle, though the resolution wasn't clear enough to identify the passengers. If Elena had left voluntarily, why was someone else with her? And why had they taken such a circuitous route? Detective Park obtained warrants for additional traffic cameras along the I-5 corridor. The trail led north towards Seattle, with the last confirmed sighting of Elena's BMW at a rest stop near Centralia, Washington, at 6:43 a.m. on March 15. At the rest stop, investigators found Elena's cell phone in a trash bin near the parking area. The phone had been factory reset, wiping all data, but the location where it was discarded provided a crucial clue about the direction of travel. The discovery of Elena's abandoned phone eliminated any remaining hope that she had left voluntarily and was simply maintaining her privacy. Someone had gone to considerable effort to dispose of the device and eliminate any digital evidence. As the investigation expanded beyond Oregon's borders, Detective Park faced a troubling reality. Elena Vasquez had either been kidnapped or killed, and her husband Marcus was the primary suspect. But proving Marcus's involvement would require more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. The case needed a body, a witness, or concrete proof of what had happened during those crucial hours when Elena disappeared. Meanwhile, Elena's family in Phoenix was struggling to understand how the daughter they knew, successful, careful, and loving, had become entangled in such a dangerous situation. Carmen Vasquez spoke to reporters, her voice breaking as she made a plea for information. Elena is a wonderful person who dedicated her life to helping children. She doesn't deserve whatever has happened to her. Please, if anyone knows anything, help us bring our daughter home. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, it became increasingly clear that Elena Vasquez might never come home at all. The digital investigation had revealed a marriage built on deception and a husband with dangerous secrets. But the most important question remained unanswered: where was Elena, and was she still alive? As spring turned to summer in 2023, the investigation into Elena Vasquez's disappearance took on new urgency. The federal agencies now involved in the case, the FBI and DEA, were building a comprehensive picture of Marcus Wright's criminal activities, but Elena herself remained missing. The prescription drug trafficking network that Marcus was allegedly involved in was more extensive than initially suspected. Federal investigators had been tracking the operation for over a year, but Marcus's role had only recently become clear. The network operated across multiple states, using legitimate medical practices as fronts for illegal prescription activities. Doctors were recruited through financial pressure or personal compromise, then guided to overprescribe controlled substances. The excess medications were collected by a network of patients who sold them on the street. Marcus's role was crucial. His legitimate medical consulting business provided cover for recruiting vulnerable practices and laundering the proceeds. His frequent travel, which Elena had found suspicious, was actually a sophisticated criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars. But the federal investigation revealed something even more troubling. Marcus Wright was not the mastermind of the operation. He was a middle manager in a larger criminal organization, which meant that Elena's discovery of his activities had put her in danger from people far more ruthless than her husband. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, who had taken over the federal aspects of the case, believed Elena had been killed to protect the drug trafficking network. Elena Vasquez was collateral damage, Agent Martinez explained to Detective Park. She discovered something that threatened a multi-million-dollar operation. These people don't hesitate to eliminate threats. The investigation into Marcus's activities had uncovered communications that suggested he was under pressure from his criminal associates in the weeks before Elena's disappearance. Encrypted messages recovered from a second phone that Marcus hadn't disclosed to police showed increasingly urgent demands for Marcus to handle the problem with his wife. One message, sent on March 10, was particularly ominous: "Your wife is asking too many questions. Fix this before we fix it for you." When confronted with this evidence, Marcus finally broke down and admitted his involvement in the drug trafficking network. But his story about Elena's disappearance remained unchanged. He claimed she had left voluntarily and he had no knowledge of what happened to her. "I never wanted Elena to get hurt," Marcus told investigators, tears streaming down his face. I was trying to get out of the business, trying to make enough money to disappear with her. But she found out before I could explain everything. Marcus's confession led to his arrest on federal drug trafficking charges, but prosecutors needed more evidence to charge him with Elena's disappearance or murder. The break in the case came from an unexpected source, Thomas Brennan, a low-level member of the drug trafficking network who had been arrested on unrelated charges in Seattle. Facing significant prison time, Brennan agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. His testimony revealed the true scope of the criminal organization and Elena's fate. According to Brennan, Elena's discovery of Marcus's activities had created a crisis within the organization. She had been close to uncovering not just her husband's involvement, but the entire network's operations in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus was ordered to handle the situation, Brennan told investigators. When he couldn't bring himself to do it, the organization sent someone else. Brennan identified the person sent to handle Elena as Viktor Petrov, a Russian national with connections to organized crime. Petrov specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The timeline Brennan provided was chilling. Elena had been killed in her own home on the evening of March 13, after she confronted Marcus about what she had discovered. Marcus had been forced to help stage her voluntary departure to buy time for Petrov to dispose of the body. Elena's BMW, driven by Petrov with Marcus as a passenger, had been used to transport her body to a remote location in the Cascade Mountains. The car was later abandoned and destroyed, while Elena's remains were buried in a location known only to Petrov. But Petrov had disappeared immediately after completing his assignment, likely having fled the country. Without his cooperation or the location of Elena's body, prosecutors faced challenges in building a murder case. The revelation of Elena's likely murder devastated her family and the Bend community. Dr. James Hoffman organized a memorial service at St. Charles Medical Center, attended by hundreds of colleagues, patients' families, and community members who had been touched by Elena's compassionate care. Elena Vasquez represented the best of what it means to be a healer, Dr. Hoffman said during the service. She dedicated her life to helping others, and she deserved so much better than what happened to her. Carmen and Roberto Vasquez flew to Bend for the memorial service, their grief compounded by the knowledge that their daughter's body might never be recovered. "We raised Elena to believe in justice and truth," Carmen said through tears. "She died because she refused to look the other way when she discovered something wrong. That's the kind of person she was." Marcus Wright pleaded guilty to federal drug trafficking charges and received a 15-year prison sentence. But without Elena's body or direct evidence of his involvement in her murder, prosecutors were unable to file homicide charges. The drug trafficking network was eventually dismantled, with dozens of arrests across multiple states. But the masterminds behind the organization were never identified, and Viktor Petrov was never located. Elena's medical license was posthumously honored by the Oregon Medical Board, and a scholarship was established in her name at the University of Oregon Medical School to support students from underrepresented communities pursuing pediatric surgery. Her disappearance also led to policy changes in how suspicious financial activities in medical practices are monitored and reported, potentially preventing similar tragedies in the future. But for those who knew and loved Elena Vasquez, no amount of recognition or policy change could fill the void left by her absence. She had been a healer, a daughter, a friend, and a woman whose only crime was discovering a truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The beautiful home on Riverside Drive where Elena and Marcus had built their life together was eventually sold, the proceeds used to pay legal fees and restitution to victims of the drug trafficking network. New owners moved in, unaware of the tragedy that had occurred within those walls. The Deschutes River continued to flow past the house, carrying with it the secrets and sorrows of the past. 2 years have passed since Dr. Elena Vasquez disappeared from her home on Riverside Drive, and the search for her remains continues. What began as a missing person case has evolved into one of Oregon's most complex criminal investigations, touching on organized crime, medical fraud, and the tragic cost of seeking truth. Detective Lisa Park, now promoted to sergeant, still works the case when new leads arise. The Elena Vasquez investigation has become her white whale, a reminder of how quickly a seemingly perfect life can conceal deadly secrets. Elena deserved justice, Sergeant Park reflects. She was a good person who got caught up in something bigger than herself. The least we can do is keep looking for her. The search for Elena's remains has focused on the remote areas of the Cascade Mountains where Thomas Brennan suggested Viktor Petrov might have taken her body. Search and rescue teams, accompanied by cadaver dogs, have covered hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain. The challenges are immense. The Cascades encompass thousands of square miles of wilderness, much of it accessible only by hiking trails or helicopter. Snow covers the high elevations for much of the year, making systematic searches impossible during winter months. Private investigators hired by Elena's family have continued the search using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced technologies. They've focused on areas within a reasonable driving distance of the route Elena's BMW took towards Seattle, but so far have found no trace of her remains. The lack of physical evidence hasn't deterred Elena's family from seeking answers. Carmen and Roberto Vasquez have spent their life savings on private investigators, search teams, and legal fees in their quest to bring their daughter home. "We can't give up," Carmen says. "Elena is still out there somewhere, and she deserves to rest in peace with her family." The Vasquez family has also become advocates for other families dealing with missing persons cases. They've worked with national organizations to improve resources for families and to keep cold cases active in the public consciousness. Elena's story has been featured on several true crime podcasts and television shows, keeping her case in the public eye and occasionally generating new tips for investigators. While most leads have proven fruitless, the publicity has helped identify other victims of the prescription drug trafficking network. Marcus Wright remains in federal prison, serving his 15-year sentence for drug trafficking. He has consistently maintained that he doesn't know the location of Elena's body, claiming Viktor Petrov handled that aspect of the crime without his involvement. Prison interviews with Marcus have revealed a man consumed by guilt and regret. He speaks of Elena with obvious affection and claims that his involvement in the drug network was initially motivated by financial pressures related to their fertility treatments and expensive lifestyle. "I never wanted any of this to happen," Marcus told a prison counselor during a recorded session. "Elena was the best thing in my life, and I destroyed everything. If I could change places with her, I would do it in a heartbeat." But Marcus's protestations of love and regret ring hollow to those who knew Elena. Her colleagues at St. Charles Medical Center remember a woman who was devoted to her patients and her principles, someone who would never have condoned the criminal activities that ultimately cost her life. Dr. Sarah Chen, who has since moved to a position at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, still thinks about her friend frequently. "Elena was one of those rare people who truly made a difference in the world," Dr. Chen reflects. "Every child she operated on, every life she saved, that's her real legacy. The people who killed her took away someone irreplaceable." The prescription drug trafficking network that cost Elena her life was eventually dismantled, but not before causing immeasurable harm. Federal prosecutors estimate that the network was responsible for distributing millions of illegal prescription pills, contributing to the opioid crisis that has devastated communities across the United States. Several doctors involved in the scheme have been convicted and sentenced to prison terms. Medical practices have implemented new monitoring systems to detect suspicious prescribing patterns. But the masterminds behind the operation, the people who ultimately ordered Elena's death, have never been identified or prosecuted. Viktor Petrov, the man believed to have killed Elena, remains a ghost. FBI investigators believe he left the United States immediately after Elena's murder, likely returning to Russia or another country without extradition agreements. His real identity may itself be false, making the chances of ever bringing him to justice remote. The case has highlighted the vulnerability of professionals who discover criminal activity in their workplaces. Elena's story has been used in training programs for healthcare workers, teaching them to recognize signs of prescription fraud and how to report suspicious activity safely. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Elena's story is the reminder it provides about the fragility of the lives we build and the courage required to stand up for what's right. Elena Vasquez was a successful surgeon, a loving daughter, and a woman who believed in justice and truth. When she discovered that her husband was involved in criminal activities, she chose to act on her principles rather than look the other way. That choice cost her everything, but it also revealed the kind of person she truly was. In a world where it's often easier to ignore uncomfortable truths, Elena chose to be brave. She chose to be good. The investigation continues, driven by the hope that someday Elena's family will have the closure they deserve. Advances in forensic technology may eventually help locate her remains. Changes in international law enforcement cooperation might someday lead to Viktor Petrov's arrest. But even if Elena's body is never found, even if her killers are never fully brought to justice, her story serves as a powerful reminder of both the best and worst of human nature. She represents the best, someone willing to sacrifice everything for truth and justice. Her killers represent the worst, people willing to destroy an innocent life to protect their criminal enterprise. The Deschutes River still flows past the house on Riverside Drive where Elena and Marcus once lived. The current owners, a young family with 2 small children, are unaware of the tragedy that occurred within those walls. They've painted over the neutral colors Elena preferred, installed a playground in the backyard, and filled the house with the sounds of laughter and life. Sometimes, neighbors who remember the Vasquez-Wright couple drive slowly past the house, wondering what secrets still lie buried in the mountains beyond Bend. The local medical community continues to honor Elena's memory, but for many, the case has become a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. Detective Park, now Sergeant Park, keeps a photo of Elena on her desk, not a crime scene photo or a missing person poster, but a picture from Elena's hospital ID badge, showing her bright smile and compassionate eyes. It serves as a daily reminder of why she became a police officer and why some cases are worth pursuing long after others have given up hope. The search for Elena Vasquez continues, powered by love, hope, and an unwavering belief that every person deserves justice, no matter how long it takes to achieve it. As we come to the end of Elena's story tonight, we're left with more questions than answers. What drove a successful surgeon to research how to disappear? What convinced a husband to participate in his wife's murder? And where, in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, does Elena Vasquez rest? These questions may never be fully answered. But Elena's story reminds us that behind every missing person case is a human being with hopes, dreams, and people who love them. Elena was a healer who dedicated her life to helping children, a daughter who called her mother every Tuesday without fail, and a woman brave enough to stand up for what was right, even when it cost her everything. The investigation into her disappearance exposed a criminal network that was poisoning communities across multiple states. While Elena paid the ultimate price for discovering the truth, her courage helped bring down an organization that was contributing to the opioid crisis destroying families nationwide. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember Dr. Elena Vasquez, not as a victim, but as a hero who chose truth over safety, justice over silence. Her legacy lives on in every child whose life was saved by her surgical skill, every medical professional inspired by her integrity, and every family member who refuses to give up the search for answers. The mystery of what happened on Riverside Drive may never be fully solved, but Elena's impact on the world will never be forgotten. In a time when it's easy to look the other way, to choose comfort over courage, Elena Vasquez chose to be brave. And sometimes, that choice makes all the difference. Rest well tonight, knowing that there are still people in this world willing to fight for truth and justice, even when the cost is high. People like Elena Vasquez, whose story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is still light worth fighting for. Story 3. I want to tell you about what happened to 42-year-old Jennifer Martinez, a successful real estate attorney who disappeared on a foggy Thursday morning in February 2024. Her story begins not with violence, but with the kind of ordinary morning that thousands of Houstonians experience every day, until something went terribly inexplicably wrong. Jennifer Elena Martinez had built what many would consider an exemplary life in Houston. At 42, she was a partner at Martinez and Associates, a boutique law firm specializing in commercial real estate transactions along the Texas Gulf Coast. The firm, which she had co-founded with her older brother Carlos 12 years earlier, had grown from a two-person operation working out of a shared office space to a respected practice with clients throughout the Houston metropolitan area. Jennifer lived alone in a beautifully restored Victorian home in the Heights, one of Houston's most desirable neighborhoods. The house, painted a soft yellow with white trim, sat on a tree-lined street where joggers passed by at dawn and neighbors still waved to each other from their front porches. She had purchased the home in 2019, and spent weekends carefully renovating it, learning to install vintage light fixtures and refinish original hardwood floors through YouTube tutorials and trial and error. Those who knew Jennifer described her as methodical, ambitious, and intensely private. She was the type of person who kept detailed calendars, arrived early to meetings, and remembered her clients' children's names and graduation dates. Her assistant, Patricia Vega, often marveled at Jennifer's ability to juggle complex real estate deals while maintaining relationships with dozens of clients, contractors, and city officials. Jennifer's personal life was more complicated than her professional success might suggest. She had been married once, in her late 20s, to a fellow attorney named David Chen. The marriage had lasted 4 years and ended amicably, with both parties citing the demands of their careers as the primary factor in their divorce. David had since remarried and moved to Dallas, but he and Jennifer remained on friendly terms, exchanging holiday cards and occasional emails about legal matters. For the past 3 years, Jennifer had been in a relationship with Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old petroleum engineer who worked for one of the major oil companies headquartered in Houston. Marcus was tall, soft-spoken, and shared Jennifer's love of historical architecture and weekend antiquing trips through small Texas towns. They had met at a charity fundraiser for historic preservation, bonding over their mutual frustration with developers who demolished beautiful old buildings to make way for generic strip malls. The relationship with Marcus had grown serious enough that they had begun discussing marriage, though Jennifer was in no hurry to remarry. She valued her independence and had worked hard to create a life that satisfied her professionally and personally. Marcus understood this about her, which was one of the qualities that had attracted Jennifer to him in the first place. February 8, 2024, began like most Thursday mornings in Jennifer's carefully ordered life. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and she followed her usual routine: 20 minutes of yoga in her living room, a shower, coffee while reviewing the day's appointments, and a light breakfast of Greek yogurt and fresh fruit. She was dressed and ready to leave the house by 7:15 a.m., wearing a navy blue suit that she had purchased specifically for an important client meeting scheduled for later that morning. The client meeting was with Harrison Development Group, a company that was planning to build a major mixed-use complex near the Houston Ship Channel. The project represented millions of dollars in potential legal fees for Jennifer's firm, and she had been preparing for this presentation for weeks. Her briefcase contained detailed zoning analyses, environmental impact studies, and financial projections that demonstrated her firm's comprehensive understanding of the complex regulatory landscape surrounding major development projects in Houston. Jennifer's neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Castillo, was watering her flower garden when Jennifer left the house that morning. Mrs. Castillo, a retired teacher who had lived on the street for 37 years, made it her business to know the comings and goings of her neighbors. She later told police that Jennifer seemed completely normal that morning. She waved, commented on how beautiful Mrs. Castillo's roses were looking, and mentioned that she was excited about an important meeting. She seemed happy, Mrs. Castillo recalled during her interview with detectives. Maybe a little nervous, but in a good way. Like someone who was looking forward to something. She got in her car and drove away just like she did every morning for the past 5 years. There was nothing different about it. Jennifer drove a silver 2022 BMW 3 Series, a car she had purchased new and maintained meticulously. She was proud of the BMW, often joking to friends that it was the first luxury car she had ever owned and probably the last, since she planned to drive it until it fell apart. The car's GPS and phone systems would later provide investigators with crucial information about Jennifer's movements on the morning she disappeared. Her first stop was Starbucks on 19th Street, where she ordered her usual, a grande Pike Place coffee with a splash of oat milk. The barista, a college student named Tyler Martinez, no relation, remembered Jennifer because she was a regular customer who always left a generous tip and asked about his classes at the University of Houston. Tyler served Jennifer at 7:42 a.m., and security cameras captured her leaving the coffee shop at 7:46 a.m. From Starbucks, Jennifer drove to her office on West Dallas Street, arriving at 8:05 a.m. The law firm occupied the second floor of a renovated warehouse building, with exposed brick walls and large windows that provided views of downtown Houston's skyline. Jennifer spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, returning phone calls, and making final preparations for the Harrison development meeting. At 10:30 a.m., Jennifer told Patricia that she was leaving for the client meeting and expected to be back by noon. The meeting was scheduled to take place at Harrison Development's offices in a high-rise building downtown, followed by a site visit to the proposed development location near the Ship Channel. Jennifer never arrived at either location. The first sign that something was wrong came at 11:15 a.m., when Robert Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Development Group, called Jennifer's office to ask if she was running late. Patricia Vega, Jennifer's assistant, was surprised by the call, since Jennifer was never late to important meetings and always called ahead if she was going to be delayed. Patricia immediately tried to reach Jennifer on her cell phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Jennifer always kept her phone charged and turned on during business hours. Patricia tried calling again 10 minutes later, with the same result. By 11:45 a.m., Patricia was genuinely concerned. She knew how important the Harrison development meeting was to Jennifer and to the firm. This was not the kind of appointment that Jennifer would miss without an explanation, even if she had suddenly become ill or had a family emergency. Robert Harrison called again at noon, this time with an edge of irritation in his voice. His company had rearranged schedules and brought in executives from their Dallas office specifically for this meeting. Patricia apologized profusely and promised to locate Jennifer immediately. Patricia's first call was to Marcus Thompson, Jennifer's boyfriend. Marcus worked for Chevron and was often in meetings where he couldn't answer his phone immediately, but he usually responded to text messages within an hour. Patricia sent him an urgent text asking if he had heard from Jennifer that morning. Marcus called back within 15 minutes, and Patricia could hear the concern in his voice as she explained the situation. Marcus told Patricia that he had spoken with Jennifer the previous evening, and she had seemed excited and well prepared for the Harrison meeting. They had made plans to have dinner on Friday evening to celebrate what Jennifer hoped would be a successful presentation. "This isn't like her at all," Marcus told Patricia. "Jennifer doesn't just disappear. Something must have happened." Marcus agreed to drive around the route between Jennifer's office and the Harrison Development Building, looking for any sign of her silver BMW. Meanwhile, Patricia began calling hospitals in the Houston area, asking if they had admitted anyone matching Jennifer's description following a car accident or medical emergency. Carlos Martinez, Jennifer's brother and business partner, was in Austin that week, taking depositions for another case. Patricia called him at 12:30 p.m., interrupting his legal proceedings to explain that Jennifer had missed the most important client meeting of the year and couldn't be reached by phone. Carlos immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Like Patricia and Marcus, he knew that Jennifer's disappearance was completely out of character. He told his colleague to handle the remaining depositions and began the 3-hour drive back to Houston. By 2 p.m., Marcus had completed his search of the downtown area without finding any trace of Jennifer or her car. He expanded his search to include alternate routes between Jennifer's office and the Harrison building, checking parking garages, hospital emergency rooms, and even driving slowly through neighborhoods where Jennifer might have stopped for some unknown reason. Patricia, meanwhile, had contacted every hospital in the greater Houston area. None had any record of admitting a patient matching Jennifer's description. She also called Jennifer's ex-husband David in Dallas, though she wasn't sure why Jennifer might have contacted him. David hadn't heard from Jennifer in several months and was shocked to learn that she was missing. At 3:15 p.m., Carlos arrived at the law firm's office, having made the drive from Austin in record time. He immediately took charge of the situation, calling the Houston Police Department to file a missing person report. The responding officer, Detective Amanda Rodriguez, arrived at the office at 4 p.m. to take statements and begin the initial investigation. Detective Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of the Houston PD, with extensive experience in missing person cases. She knew that the first 24 hours were crucial in determining whether someone had disappeared voluntarily or had become the victim of foul play. Jennifer's case immediately struck her as serious, given the victim's responsible nature and the fact that she had missed an important business meeting without explanation. The detective's first step was to obtain Jennifer's cell phone records and GPS data from her BMW. This process required warrants, which could take several hours to obtain. In the meantime, Detective Rodriguez began interviewing everyone who had contact with Jennifer in the days leading up to her disappearance. Patricia provided the detective with Jennifer's detailed calendar, which showed no unusual appointments or meetings in the weeks before February 8. Jennifer's schedule had been focused primarily on preparing for the Harrison Development presentation, with routine client meetings and administrative tasks filling the remainder of her time. Marcus met with Detective Rodriguez at 6 p.m., providing information about Jennifer's personal life and state of mind. He emphasized that Jennifer had been looking forward to the Harrison meeting and had shown no signs of depression, anxiety, or desire to leave Houston. Their relationship was stable and happy, with no recent conflicts or unusual stresses. "We were talking about taking a vacation to Europe this summer," Marcus told the detective. Jennifer had already started researching hotels in Paris and Rome. She was making plans for the future. People don't make those kinds of plans and then just disappear. Carlos provided similar information about Jennifer's professional life. The law firm was financially stable and growing, with no outstanding legal problems or conflicts with clients. Jennifer had been proud of landing the Harrison Development account and had spent considerable time and energy preparing for the presentation. "My sister doesn't take risks," Carlos explained to Detective Rodriguez. "She's the most careful, prepared person I know. If she said she was going to a meeting, she would be there unless something prevented her from going." Detective Rodriguez's investigation began in earnest on Friday, February 9, when the warrants for Jennifer's phone and vehicle GPS data were approved. The information they revealed painted a troubling picture of Jennifer's final known movements. Jennifer's phone had been active throughout the morning of February 8, receiving and sending text messages, checking emails, and accessing her calendar app. The last activity on the phone occurred at 10:47 a.m., when Jennifer used her banking app to check her account balance, a routine action that she performed almost daily. At 10:48 a.m., Jennifer's phone abruptly stopped communicating with cell towers. The device either lost power, was turned off, or was damaged in some way that prevented it from functioning. This timing was significant because it occurred while Jennifer should have been driving from her office to the Harrison Development building downtown. The GPS data from Jennifer's BMW told a more detailed story. The car had left the parking garage beneath Jennifer's office building at 10:33 a.m., which matched Patricia's recollection of when Jennifer had left for her meeting. The BMW had traveled east on West Dallas Street, then turned south on Main Street, following a logical route toward downtown Houston. However, instead of continuing toward the Harrison Development building, Jennifer's car had taken an unexpected detour. At 10:41 a.m., the GPS showed the BMW turning east on McKinney Street, then south on Fannin Street, before finally stopping at 10:45 a.m. in the parking lot of a small shopping center near the intersection of Fannin and Wheeler. This location was significant for several reasons. First, it was several miles away from where Jennifer should have been heading for her business meeting. Second, the shopping center contained only a few businesses, a check-cashing store, a small Mexican restaurant, a cell phone repair shop, and a vacant storefront that had previously housed a dry cleaner. Most importantly, the GPS data showed that Jennifer's car had remained parked in this location for exactly 7 minutes before the tracking system went offline at 10:52 a.m. Whatever happened to Jennifer had occurred during those 7 minutes, or immediately afterward. Detective Rodriguez visited the shopping center on Friday afternoon, accompanied by Detective James Wilson, a specialist in vehicular crimes. The parking lot was small, with space for perhaps 20 vehicles, and was overlooked by several businesses and a residential apartment complex across the street. The detectives began the painstaking process of interviewing everyone who worked at or near the shopping center. The owner of the Mexican restaurant, Maria Gonzalez, remembered seeing a silver car parked in the lot on Thursday morning, though she couldn't be certain it was Jennifer's BMW. The check-cashing store had security cameras, but the owner explained that they were only activated when the store was being robbed, which thankfully had never happened. The most promising lead came from the cell phone repair shop, where the owner, Kevin Park, mentioned that he had seen a silver BMW in the parking lot around 10:45 a.m. on Thursday. Park had noticed the car because it seemed out of place. Most of his customers drove older, less expensive vehicles. There was a woman sitting in the driver's seat, Park told the detectives. She appeared to be talking on her phone or maybe talking to someone in the passenger seat. I only looked for a few seconds before I went back to working on a phone, so I didn't see much detail. Park's observation was crucial because it suggested that Jennifer might not have been alone in her car. If someone had been with her, it could explain why she had deviated from her planned route to the Harrison development meeting. Detective Rodriguez also interviewed residents of the apartment complex across the street from the shopping center. Most had been at work or school during the time when Jennifer's car was parked in the lot, but one resident, an elderly man named Frank Torres, had been sitting on his balcony drinking coffee when he noticed the silver BMW. Torres had a partial view of the parking lot from his second-floor apartment, and he told detectives that he had seen what appeared to be two people in the silver car. He couldn't make out faces or other details due to the distance and the angle of his view, but he was certain that there had been someone in the passenger seat as well as the driver. They sat there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, Torres recalled. Then the car left, but I didn't see which direction it went because my view is blocked by the trees once cars leave the parking lot. This information fundamentally changed the nature of the investigation. If Jennifer had not been alone in her car, the case had likely escalated from a missing person investigation to a potential kidnapping or worse. Detective Rodriguez immediately began exploring who might have been with Jennifer that morning. The timing of the detour, occurring between Jennifer's departure from her office and her missed appointment, suggested that the encounter had been unplanned or had been arranged at the last minute. A review of Jennifer's phone records revealed several calls and text messages in the days leading up to her disappearance, but nothing that seemed unusual or suspicious. Most of her communications were with clients, Marcus, her brother Carlos, or Patricia regarding routine business and personal matters. However, one call stood out as potentially significant. On February 6, 2 days before Jennifer disappeared, she had received a call from a number that wasn't in her contact list. The call had lasted 14 minutes, which was unusually long for Jennifer to spend talking to someone she didn't know well. Detective Rodriguez traced the number to a prepaid cell phone that had been purchased at a convenience store in northwest Houston. The store's security cameras showed the purchase being made by a middle-aged Hispanic man, but the image quality was too poor to make a positive identification. As Detective Rodriguez dug deeper into Jennifer's life, she began to uncover complexities that the missing woman's family and friends had either been unaware of or had chosen not to mention during their initial interviews. The investigation into Jennifer's financial records revealed that while her law practice was generally successful, she had been dealing with some significant financial pressures in recent months. A major client had defaulted on a substantial legal bill, leaving Jennifer's firm short of the cash flow they needed to meet their office lease and employee salary obligations. More troubling was the discovery that Jennifer had taken out a $75,000 personal loan from a private lending company 6 weeks before her disappearance. The loan carried an extremely high interest rate, nearly 20% annually, which was unusual for someone with Jennifer's credit rating and financial sophistication. Carlos Martinez, Jennifer's brother and business partner, was visibly shaken when Detective Rodriguez confronted him with information about the loan. Initially, he claimed to have no knowledge of his sister's financial difficulties, but when pressed, he admitted that Jennifer had mentioned some temporary cash flow problems, but had assured him that she was handling the situation. Jennifer always handled the financial side of the business, Carlos explained during his second interview with police. I focused on the legal work, and she managed the contracts, billing, and accounting. If she said everything was fine, I believed her. Maybe I should have paid more attention. The private lending company that had provided Jennifer's loan was called Gulf Coast Financial Solutions, and it operated out of a small office in a strip mall near the Houston Ship Channel. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that Gulf Coast Financial was owned by a man named Vincent Russo, who had a criminal history that included convictions for loan sharking and extortion. Russo, a 58-year-old with graying hair and an expensive suit that didn't quite hide his intimidating demeanor, agreed to meet with Detective Rodriguez at the Houston Police Department. He brought his attorney, which immediately suggested that he understood the serious nature of Jennifer's disappearance. During the interview, Russo claimed that his lending business was completely legitimate and that Jennifer had been a model client who had made all of her required payments on time. He provided documentation showing that Jennifer owed approximately $68,000 on the original loan, with payments of $2,800 per month. Ms. Martinez understood the terms of the loan, Russo told Detective Rodriguez. She needed money quickly, and traditional banks couldn't help her fast enough. We provided a service, and she was grateful for it. There were never any problems with her payments. However, Russo's story contained inconsistencies that troubled Detective Rodriguez. When asked about the phone call to Jennifer on February 6, Russo initially claimed not to remember it, then said it had been a routine check-in call to ensure that Jennifer was satisfied with their service. We like to maintain good relationships with our clients, Russo explained, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, suggesting that he was saying more than he should. Detective Rodriguez's investigation into Gulf Coast Financial revealed that several of Russo's previous clients had reported being threatened or intimidated when they fell behind on their loan payments. 2 clients had filed police reports alleging that Russo's associates had visited their homes and workplaces to demand payment, though no charges had ever been filed due to lack of evidence. The detective also discovered that Jennifer's $2,800 monthly payment to Gulf Coast Financial was due on February 10, 2 days after she disappeared. If Jennifer had been having trouble making the payment, it could have provided a motive for someone to harm her. Marcus Thompson, Jennifer's boyfriend, was shocked when Detective Rodriguez told him about the loan and Jennifer's financial difficulties. During their 3-year relationship, Jennifer had never mentioned money problems, and Marcus had assumed that her successful law practice provided her with a comfortable income. She always seemed to have everything under control, Marcus told the detective. She paid for dinners, bought nice clothes, took care of her house. If she was struggling financially, she hid it very well. Marcus's surprise seemed genuine, but Detective Rodriguez noted that people often kept financial problems secret from their romantic partners, especially in relationships where both parties valued independence and success. The investigation took another significant turn when Detective Rodriguez received a call from Jennifer's bank. A suspicious transaction had been flagged on Jennifer's business account. Someone had attempted to withdraw $25,000 in cash using Jennifer's ATM card and PIN number. The attempted withdrawal had occurred on Friday, February 9, the day after Jennifer disappeared, at a bank branch in southwest Houston, nearly 20 miles from where Jennifer's car had last been tracked. The transaction had been declined because Jennifer's business account contained only $8,400, far less than the requested amount. Security cameras at the bank showed a man in his 30s, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, attempting to use Jennifer's card at the ATM. The image quality was poor, but the man appeared to be Hispanic, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a medium build. He had left the bank quickly when the transaction was declined. The fact that someone had Jennifer's ATM card and knew her PIN number suggested that Jennifer had either given this information voluntarily or had been forced to provide it under duress. Either scenario supported the theory that Jennifer's disappearance was not voluntary. With evidence mounting that Jennifer Martinez had been the victim of foul play, the Houston Police Department escalated their investigation and launched a comprehensive search for both Jennifer and her missing BMW. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with multiple agencies, including the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and even the FBI, which had jurisdiction in potential kidnapping cases. Jennifer's photograph and her car's license plate number were distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout Texas and neighboring states. The search focused initially on areas around Houston where criminals might dispose of evidence or hide a victim. Teams of officers and volunteers scoured vacant lots, construction sites, and abandoned buildings in the industrial areas near the ship channel. Divers searched bayous and drainage canals, while aircraft equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew over wooded areas and landfills. Carlos Martinez, Jennifer's brother, organized a separate civilian search effort with help from members of the local Hispanic community and Jennifer's professional colleagues. Hundreds of volunteers distributed missing person flyers throughout Houston, posted Jennifer's photograph on social media, and conducted systematic searches of neighborhoods and business districts. The civilian search efforts were coordinated by Maria Santos, a community activist who had helped organize searches for other missing persons in the Houston area. Maria understood the importance of maintaining hope while preparing for the worst possible outcomes. "We search because we have to," Maria explained to the volunteers who gathered each morning at a community center in the Heights. "Jennifer's family needs to know what happened to her, and Jennifer deserves to be found and brought home." Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez continued investigating the financial and personal aspects of Jennifer's life. The detective's inquiries into Gulf Coast Financial Solutions had revealed connections to several other businesses that appeared to be fronts for illegal activities. Vincent Russo, the owner of Gulf Coast Financial, was associated with Tony Castellanos, a 45-year-old man who had been investigated multiple times for money laundering, drug trafficking, and loan sharking. Castellanos operated several legitimate businesses, a restaurant, a car dealership, and a construction company, but police suspected that these businesses were used to hide the proceeds from illegal activities. Castellanos had never been convicted of any serious crimes, largely because potential witnesses were reluctant to testify against him. Several people who had considered cooperating with law enforcement investigations had experienced mysterious accidents, sudden changes of heart, or had simply disappeared from the Houston area. The connection between Russo and Castellanos suggested that Jennifer's $75,000 loan might have come from sources that were far more dangerous than a simple private lending company. If Jennifer had fallen behind on her payments or had threatened to expose illegal activities, she could have become a target for violence. Detective Rodriguez's investigation also revealed that Jennifer had been conducting her own research into Gulf Coast Financial Solutions in the weeks before her disappearance. Jennifer's computer showed multiple internet searches for information about Vincent Russo, Tony Castellanos, and several businesses associated with their operations. Most significantly, Jennifer had downloaded and printed several news articles about other people who had borrowed money from private lenders and had subsequently experienced problems. One article described a small business owner who had been hospitalized after being beaten by unknown assailants. Another article reported on a woman who had disappeared after falling behind on payments to an unlicensed lending company. Patricia Vega, Jennifer's assistant, confirmed that Jennifer had been spending considerable time researching something in the weeks before her disappearance, but Patricia had assumed it was related to a client matter. Jennifer had been secretive about her research, working on it after hours and keeping the relevant files password protected on her computer. She seemed worried about something, Patricia told Detective Rodriguez during a follow-up interview. Not scared, exactly, but concerned. Like she was trying to figure out how to handle a difficult situation. The breakthrough in the case came on February 15, 1 week after Jennifer's disappearance, when her silver BMW was discovered in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse complex near the Houston Ship Channel. The location was approximately 15 miles from the shopping center where Jennifer's car had last been tracked by GPS. The BMW had been partially hidden behind a large shipping container, suggesting that whoever had left it there had wanted to conceal it from casual observation. The car appeared to be undamaged, but it had obviously been thoroughly cleaned, both inside and outside. Detective Wilson, the vehicular crime specialist, processed the BMW methodically. Despite the apparent cleaning, forensics technicians were able to recover trace evidence that would prove crucial to the investigation. Small amounts of blood were found on the carpet in the trunk, and DNA analysis would later confirm that the blood belonged to Jennifer Martinez. The discovery of Jennifer's car, combined with the blood evidence, essentially confirmed that Jennifer had been murdered. The location where the car was found, in an industrial area controlled by businesses associated with Tony Castellanos, provided additional evidence linking Jennifer's disappearance to the criminal organization that had apparently provided her loan. However, Jennifer's body remained missing, and without it, building a case against her killers would be extremely difficult. Detective Rodriguez knew that Russo and Castellanos were experienced criminals who understood how to eliminate evidence and intimidate witnesses. The search for Jennifer's remains expanded to include areas around the abandoned warehouse where her car had been found. The industrial district near the ship channel contained numerous locations where a body could be hidden: vacant buildings, construction sites, chemical plants with restricted access, and waterways that eventually flowed into Galveston Bay. Despite the discovery of Jennifer's car and the mounting evidence that she had been murdered, the investigation into her disappearance encountered the obstacles that often plague cases involving organized criminal activity: witnesses who refused to cooperate, evidence that seemed to disappear, and suspects who had alibis provided by associates with their own reasons to lie. Vincent Russo and Tony Castellanos both hired expensive criminal defense attorneys and refused to answer any questions about Jennifer Martinez or their business relationships with her. Both men claimed to have been out of town on February 8, the day of Jennifer's disappearance, and provided documentation to support their alibis. However, Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that both men had associates who could have acted on their behalf. The Houston Police Department identified several individuals with criminal histories who worked for businesses connected to Russo and Castellanos. These individuals had been involved in debt collection activities that had sometimes turned violent. One person of particular interest was Miguel Santos, a 34-year-old man who worked as a security consultant for several of Castellanos' businesses. Santos had been arrested multiple times for assault and intimidation, though he had rarely been convicted due to victims who changed their testimony or failed to appear in court. Santos drove a dark blue sedan that matched the description of the vehicle that Carlos Medina had seen parked behind Jennifer's truck on the day she disappeared. However, Santos claimed that his car had been in the shop for repairs on February 8, and he produced documentation from an auto repair business to support his story. Detective Rodriguez discovered that the auto repair shop was owned by Castellanos' brother-in-law, raising questions about the reliability of the alibi. However, without additional evidence, she couldn't prove that the repair documentation had been falsified. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that Jennifer's research into Gulf Coast Financial Solutions had disappeared from her office computer. Someone with sophisticated technical knowledge had accessed Jennifer's computer remotely and deleted specific files, while leaving other documents untouched. Carlos Martinez, Jennifer's brother, hired a private computer forensics specialist to attempt to recover the deleted files. The specialist, Dr. Sarah Kim, was able to retrieve fragments of some documents, including portions of emails that Jennifer had exchanged with someone whose identity had been carefully hidden. The recovered email fragments suggested that Jennifer had been planning to report Gulf Coast Financial Solutions to law enforcement authorities. She had apparently gathered evidence of illegal lending practices, money laundering, and connections to other criminal activities. One email fragment contained the text, "I have documented everything, and I plan to turn it over to the authorities next week. I can't continue to be part of this, even inadvertently." If Jennifer had indeed been planning to expose the criminal organization that had provided her loan, it would have given them a clear motive for murder. However, the email fragments were incomplete and couldn't be definitively linked to any specific recipient. The case took an unexpected turn in March 2024, when Miguel Santos was arrested on unrelated charges following a bar fight that left another man hospitalized with serious injuries. While Santos was in jail awaiting trial on the assault charges, Detective Rodriguez hoped that he might be willing to provide information about Jennifer's disappearance in exchange for leniency. Santos initially refused to discuss Jennifer Martinez or his employers, but after several weeks in jail, he agreed to meet with Detective Rodriguez and her partner. The meeting took place in the presence of Santos's attorney, and he provided information that was both valuable and disturbing. According to Santos, Jennifer had indeed been targeted for elimination after she threatened to expose the criminal activities of Gulf Coast Financial Solutions. However, Santos claimed that he had not been involved in Jennifer's murder and didn't know who had actually carried out the killing. They brought in someone from out of state, Santos told the detectives. Someone who didn't have connections to Houston, so there wouldn't be any local witnesses or complications. I heard it was handled very professionally. Santos's information suggested that Jennifer's murder had been carried out by a contract killer, which would explain why the Houston Police Department had been unable to identify the perpetrator through their usual investigative methods. Professional killers typically avoided leaving evidence and had no local connections that could be traced by law enforcement. However, Santos refused to provide more specific information about who had ordered Jennifer's murder or who had carried it out. He claimed that providing such information would result in his own death, either in prison or after his release. "You don't understand how these people operate," Santos told Detective Rodriguez. "They don't forgive, and they don't forget. If I talk, I'm dead. If my family talks, they're dead. That's just how it is." Despite the lack of cooperation from Santos and other potential witnesses, Detective Rodriguez continued working to build a case against the individuals responsible for Jennifer's murder. The detective knew that organized crime cases often took years to develop, as investigators gradually accumulated evidence and convinced witnesses to come forward. As we approach the first anniversary of Jennifer Martinez's disappearance, her case remains officially open but practically stalled. Detective Rodriguez continues to investigate leads and review evidence, but the criminal organization responsible for Jennifer's murder has proven to be both sophisticated and ruthless in protecting their secrets. The financial pressures that led Jennifer to seek a high-interest loan from Gulf Coast Financial Solutions have been pieced together through months of investigation. Jennifer's law firm had been struggling with cash flow problems caused by several clients who had defaulted on their legal bills. Rather than admit to her brother Carlos that their business was in trouble, Jennifer had sought private financing to cover their expenses while she worked to collect the outstanding debts. Jennifer's decision to borrow money from Vincent Russo's operation had been driven by desperation and time pressure, not by any desire to become involved with criminal activities. She had genuinely believed that she was dealing with a legitimate, if expensive, private lending company. The tragedy of Jennifer's situation was that she had been trying to solve her financial problems through her own research and investigation. In the weeks before her disappearance, Jennifer had discovered the criminal connections behind Gulf Coast Financial Solutions and had decided that she couldn't remain silent about what she had learned. Jennifer's moral character, which had made her a respected attorney and trusted friend, had ultimately cost her life. She couldn't live with the knowledge that she had inadvertently become involved with criminals, and her decision to contact law enforcement had made her a target for elimination. Carlos Martinez has struggled with guilt over his sister's death, believing that if he had been more involved in the financial management of their law practice, Jennifer might never have felt compelled to seek dangerous private financing. He has kept the law firm operating, though it will never be the same without Jennifer's meticulous attention to detail and her ability to build relationships with clients. Marcus Thompson, Jennifer's boyfriend, moved away from Houston 6 months after her disappearance. The city held too many memories and unanswered questions for him to build a new life there. He occasionally calls Detective Rodriguez to ask about the status of the investigation, though there is rarely new information to share. "I keep thinking about all the plans we made," Marcus told the detective during one of their conversations. We were going to travel to Europe, maybe get married, buy a house together. Jennifer was always planning for the future, always believing that things would work out if you just worked hard enough and did the right thing. She couldn't have imagined that trying to do the right thing would get her killed. The Houston Police Department has maintained surveillance on Vincent Russo and Tony Castellanos, but both men have been careful to avoid any activities that might provide grounds for arrest. Gulf Coast Financial Solutions closed its doors 3 months after Jennifer's disappearance, with Russo claiming that he was retiring from the lending business to focus on other interests. Castellanos continues to operate his legitimate businesses, the restaurant, car dealership, and construction company, while law enforcement agencies monitor his activities for signs of continued criminal enterprise. However, experienced criminals like Castellanos understand how to adapt their operations to avoid detection, and proving their involvement in serious crimes remains extremely difficult. The search for Jennifer's remains has continued sporadically throughout the year, with volunteer groups organized by Maria Santos conducting systematic searches of areas around Houston where a body might have been concealed. These searches have been heartbreaking for Jennifer's family and friends, but they represent the only hope of eventually providing Jennifer with a proper burial and bringing some measure of closure to those who loved her. Detective Rodriguez has consulted with FBI behavioral analysts who specialize in cases involving organized crime and contract killings. Their assessment suggests that Jennifer's body was likely disposed of in a way that would make discovery extremely unlikely, possibly weighted down and dumped in deep water, cremated, or buried in a location known only to her killers. Professional killers don't leave bodies where they can be found, one FBI analyst explained to Detective Rodriguez. They understand that a body is evidence, and they have methods for ensuring that evidence disappears permanently. This assessment has been difficult for Jennifer's family to accept, as it suggests that they may never have the opportunity to lay Jennifer to rest in a traditional burial. However, Carlos Martinez has found some comfort in organizing an annual memorial service for Jennifer, held each February 8 at the community center where volunteer searchers have gathered throughout the year. The memorial service attracts dozens of people who knew Jennifer professionally and personally, as well as community members who have been touched by her story. Father Miguel Hernandez, the priest at Jennifer's former parish, conducts a service that celebrates Jennifer's life while acknowledging the questions that remain unanswered about her death. Jennifer lived a life dedicated to helping others and pursuing justice, Father Hernandez said during the most recent memorial service. Though we may never understand why her life was cut short, we can honor her memory by continuing to seek truth and by supporting those who, like Jennifer, choose to do what is right even when it is difficult. The impact of Jennifer's case has extended beyond her immediate family and friends. The Houston Bar Association has established the Jennifer Martinez Memorial Scholarship, which provides financial assistance to law students who demonstrate Jennifer's combination of academic excellence and commitment to ethical practice. Several attorneys who knew Jennifer have also become advocates for stronger regulation of private lending companies, working with state legislators to pass laws that would prevent criminals from using lending businesses as fronts for other illegal activities. Patricia Vega, Jennifer's former assistant, now works for another law firm but remains in contact with Carlos Martinez and continues to help with efforts to keep Jennifer's case in the public eye. Patricia has spoken at several community events about the warning signs that might help other people avoid the kind of financial desperation that led Jennifer to seek a dangerous loan. Jennifer was one of the smartest, most careful people I ever knew, Patricia tells audiences at these events. If she could be deceived by criminals who appeared to be running a legitimate business, it could happen to anyone. We all need to be more aware of the risks and more willing to ask for help before we reach the point of desperation. As I near the end of Jennifer's story, it's important to reflect on the broader implications of her case and what it reveals about the intersection of legitimate business, criminal enterprise, and the vulnerabilities that affect even successful, intelligent people. Jennifer Martinez was not naive or reckless. She was an accomplished attorney who understood contracts, financial risks, and the importance of due diligence. However, she found herself in a situation where time pressure and pride prevented her from making the cautious decisions that might have saved her life. The criminal organization that targeted Jennifer operated by exploiting exactly these kinds of pressures. They presented themselves as a legitimate business solution for people who needed money quickly and couldn't obtain traditional bank financing. Their professional appearance, proper documentation, and initial adherence to stated terms created an illusion of legitimacy that concealed their true nature. Vincent Russo and Tony Castellanos were not street-level criminals operating out of back alleys. They were sophisticated white-collar criminals who understood how to use legitimate business structures to hide illegal activities. They rented offices in respectable locations, hired attorneys and accountants, and maintained relationships with other businesses that appeared to be completely legal. This sophistication made them particularly dangerous, because their victims often didn't realize they were dealing with criminals until it was too late to extricate themselves safely. Jennifer's research into Gulf Coast financial solutions had revealed the criminal connections, but by then she was already obligated to make monthly payments to people who would kill to protect their secrets. Detective Rodriguez's investigation has contributed to a broader understanding of how these criminal enterprises operate in major cities like Houston. The detective has shared her findings with federal law enforcement agencies, which use the information to identify similar operations in other parts of the country. These aren't isolated criminals working alone, Detective Rodriguez explained during a presentation to a conference of law enforcement officers. They're part of networks that extend across state lines and involve dozens of people in various legitimate and illegitimate businesses. Stopping them requires coordination between multiple agencies and a long-term commitment to building cases that can survive sophisticated legal challenges. The challenge for law enforcement is that successful prosecution of organized crime cases requires witnesses who are willing to testify, documentation that proves criminal intent, and evidence that connects specific individuals to specific crimes. In Jennifer's case, potential witnesses are afraid to come forward, crucial documents have been destroyed or hidden, and the actual killer was likely brought in from outside Houston specifically to avoid local connections. However, Detective Rodriguez remains hopeful that the case will eventually be solved. Criminal organizations that operate for years or decades inevitably make mistakes, lose the loyalty of associates, or encounter financial pressures that force them to take risks. When that happens, cases that seemed unsolvable can suddenly break open. "I've seen it happen before," Detective Rodriguez said during a recent interview. Someone gets arrested on other charges and decides to cooperate. Or a witness who was too afraid to talk initially finds the courage to come forward years later. Or new technology allows us to analyze evidence in ways that weren't possible when the crime occurred. The detective keeps Jennifer's case file on her desk, reviewing it regularly for details that might have been overlooked or connections that weren't obvious during the initial investigation. She maintains contact with informants and continues to monitor the activities of individuals associated with Vincent Russo and Tony Castellanos. Carlos Martinez has established a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of his sister's killers. The reward has generated dozens of tips over the past year, though none have provided the breakthrough that investigators need to make arrests. Some of the tips have come from people who claim to have information about Jennifer's murder, but who want guarantees of protection that law enforcement cannot provide. Others have come from individuals seeking reward money without having genuine information about the case. However, Detective Rodriguez believes that the reward serves an important purpose even if it doesn't immediately solve the case. It keeps Jennifer's story in the public consciousness and reminds potential witnesses that there are people who care about finding the truth. "Someone out there knows what happened to Jennifer," Detective Rodriguez said. "Maybe they were involved directly, or maybe they heard something from someone who was involved. Eventually, someone will decide that the reward money is worth the risk, or they'll develop a conscience about staying silent while a family suffers." The detective also believes that ongoing pressure on the criminal organization responsible for Jennifer's murder will eventually produce results. Law enforcement agencies continue to investigate Vincent Russo and Tony Castellanos for other crimes, and successful prosecution on any charges could provide leverage to obtain information about Jennifer's case. "These people aren't untouchable," Detective Rodriguez explained. "They make money through illegal activities, and that means they're always at risk of arrest and prosecution. When that happens, they sometimes decide that cooperating with law enforcement is preferable to spending the rest of their lives in prison. As we conclude this long journey through Jennifer Martinez's story, it's fitting to remember not just the circumstances of her disappearance and death, but the life she lived and the person she was to those who knew and loved her. Jennifer was born in Houston on a warm September morning in 1981, the second child of Miguel and Carmen Martinez, who had immigrated to Texas from Mexico in the 1970s. Her parents worked multiple jobs to provide for their children, with Miguel working construction during the day and security at night, while Carmen cleaned office buildings in the early morning hours before taking care of Jennifer and Carlos during the day. Despite the financial struggles of her childhood, Jennifer excelled in school from an early age. Her teachers remembered her as a serious, determined student who approached every assignment with the same methodical attention to detail that would later characterize her legal work. She spent hours at the public library, not just completing homework but reading everything she could find about law, history, and business. Jennifer's decision to become an attorney was inspired by a high school civics teacher, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, who recognized Jennifer's analytical mind and encouraged her to consider law school. Mrs. Thompson helped Jennifer navigate the college application process and find scholarships that made higher education financially possible for a student from a working-class family. At the University of Houston, Jennifer studied political science and graduated summa cum laude before attending the University of Texas School of Law. She worked part-time throughout college and law school, sending money home to help her parents and saving every dollar she could for her future career. Jennifer's law school professors remembered her as a student who asked thoughtful questions and approached legal problems with creativity and thoroughness. She served as an editor of the Law Review and participated in moot court competitions, where her careful preparation and clear speaking style earned recognition from judges and fellow students. After graduating from law school, Jennifer worked for a large Houston law firm for 3 years, gaining experience in commercial real estate transactions and learning the business skills that would later help her establish her own practice. Her colleagues from those early years described her as someone who arrived early, stayed late, and never missed a deadline. Jennifer's decision to start her own law firm with her brother Carlos was motivated by a desire to have more control over her practice and to focus on helping small business owners and individual clients who might be overlooked by larger firms. She took pride in explaining complex legal concepts in terms that her clients could understand, and she never made them feel stupid for asking questions. The Victorian house in the Heights that became Jennifer's home was more than just a place to live. It was a reflection of her appreciation for history, craftsmanship, and the satisfaction that comes from restoring something beautiful. She spent weekends learning skills that she had never needed before: how to repair plaster walls, refinish hardwood floors, and restore original light fixtures. Jennifer's neighbors remember her as someone who contributed to the community in quiet but meaningful ways. She organized an annual block party, helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, and volunteered at a local legal aid clinic that provided free services to low-income families. Her relationship with Marcus Thompson represented Jennifer's hope for a future that balanced personal happiness with professional success. Those who saw them together described a couple who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, who shared interests and values, and who supported each other's individual goals while building something together. Jennifer's love for travel was something she had developed later in life, as financial success allowed her to explore places she had only read about as a child. She and Marcus had taken trips to New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans, with Jennifer serving as the meticulous planner who researched hotels, restaurants, and historical sites months in advance. The European vacation that Jennifer and Marcus had been planning for the summer of 2024 would have been Jennifer's first trip outside North America. She had purchased travel guides for France and Italy and had begun learning basic phrases in both languages, approaching the preparation with the same thoroughness she brought to everything in her life. Perhaps most importantly, Jennifer was remembered by family and friends as someone who tried to do the right thing, even when it was difficult or costly. Her decision to expose the criminal activities of Gulf Coast Financial Solutions, knowing that it might put her in danger, was entirely consistent with the values that had guided her throughout her life. Jennifer couldn't live with the knowledge that she had inadvertently become involved with criminals, Carlos Martinez said during his sister's memorial service. She knew that staying silent would be safer, but she also knew that other people might be hurt if she didn't speak up. That's who Jennifer was, someone who chose to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. As you settle into sleep tonight, remember Jennifer Martinez, a woman who built a successful career through hard work and determination, who loved her family and contributed to her community, and who died because she chose truth over safety. Her story reminds us that evil often hides behind legitimate facades, that good people can find themselves in dangerous situations through no fault of their own, and that the courage to do what is right sometimes comes at the ultimate price. The lights of Houston continue to shine each night, reflecting off the waters of Buffalo Bayou and illuminating the skyline that Jennifer saw every day as she drove to work. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, people who know what happened to Jennifer continue to keep their silence, while her family and friends continue to hope for justice and answers. Detective Rodriguez continues her investigation, following leads that may eventually bring Jennifer's killers to trial. Carlos Martinez continues to practice law and honor his sister's memory through scholarship and community service. Marcus Thompson has built a new life in another city, though he carries Jennifer's memory with him wherever he goes. And in a quiet cemetery in northwest Houston, there is a memorial stone with Jennifer's name and dates, though no body lies beneath it. The stone reads simply, Jennifer Elena Martinez, 1981 to 2024. Beloved daughter, sister, and friend. She chose truth over safety. On quiet evenings, when the Texas heat gives way to cooler air and the city settles into the rhythm of another night, visitors sometimes leave flowers at Jennifer's memorial stone. They are strangers who have heard her story and have been moved by her courage, family members who refuse to give up hope, and colleagues who remember her dedication to justice. Jennifer's story continues, not in the investigation that may someday solve her murder, but in the lives of people who have been inspired by her example to stand up for what is right, to help their neighbors, and to build something beautiful in a world that can be cruel and dangerous. As the gentle sounds of the Houston night fade into silence, remember that every life has value, every story matters, and every person who chooses courage over comfort makes the world a little better for those who come after. Story 4. This is the story of what happened on a warm March evening in 2024, when 35-year-old Milton Ayers never made it home from what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Milton Ayers was the kind of man you'd never expect to find at the center of a mystery. Born and raised in Phoenix, he knew these streets like the lines on his weathered hands. At 35, Milton worked as a maintenance supervisor for a chain of auto repair shops scattered across the Phoenix metropolitan area. His route took him from Glendale to Tempe, checking on equipment, managing inventory, and solving the small problems that keep businesses running smoothly. March 10, 2024 started like any other Tuesday for Milton. The Arizona sun was already warming the pavement by 7 a.m. when he kissed his wife Sarah goodbye at their modest ranch-style home in the Maryvale neighborhood. Sarah later told police that Milton seemed in good spirits that morning. He'd made coffee for both of them, checked the weather on his phone, and mentioned he might stop by the hardware store on his way home to pick up supplies for the backyard garden they'd been planning. Milton's first stop was the shop on Grand Avenue, where he spent an hour reviewing maintenance logs and ordering new hydraulic fluid for the lifts. The shop manager, Roberto Martinez, remembered Milton being his usual self, methodical, friendly, asking about Roberto's kids and their Little League games. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. By noon, Milton had visited 3 more locations. Security cameras at each shop showed him going about his routine work, clipboard in hand, occasionally stopping to chat with mechanics and office staff. Everyone who interacted with Milton that day would later tell investigators the same thing: he seemed completely normal, maybe even a little more upbeat than usual. It was around 2 p.m. when Milton's day took an unexpected turn. His cell phone records show he received a call that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The number was local, but when police later traced it, they discovered it belonged to a prepaid phone that had been purchased with cash at a convenience store 3 weeks earlier. The store's security footage from that purchase had already been overwritten. Milton's co-worker, Janet Ellis, was with him at the Camelback Road location when the call came in. She remembered Milton stepping outside to take it privately, which struck her as odd because he usually took calls right there in the office. When he came back inside, Janet noticed he seemed distracted, checking his watch more frequently and wrapping up his inspection faster than usual. "He told me he needed to make a quick stop before heading home," Janet later told detectives. "Said it was family business, nothing serious, but he wanted to handle it today rather than put it off. I asked if everything was okay, and he just smiled and said, 'You know how family can be sometimes.'" Milton finished his work by 3:30 p.m. and loaded his company truck with the tools and paperwork he'd collected throughout the day. The last security camera to capture Milton alive was at the Camelback location, showing him walking to his white Ford F-150 with the company logo on the side. He appeared to be checking his phone as he climbed into the driver's seat. What happened next would remain a mystery that continues to baffle investigators more than a year later. Reconstructing Milton's final hours required detective work that resembled putting together a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. Through cell phone tower data, traffic cameras, and witness accounts, investigators were able to piece together a rough timeline of his movements after leaving the Camelback Road shop. At 3:45 p.m., Milton's phone pinged off a cell tower near 19th Avenue and Indian School Road. This made sense, it was a logical route home to Maryvale. But instead of continuing west toward his house, the next ping came from a tower much further south, near 19th Avenue and Broadway Road. This deviation from his normal route was the first sign that something was different about this Tuesday. Traffic cameras captured Milton's white company truck at several intersections along this southbound route. In each image, he appeared to be alone in the vehicle, and the truck was moving at normal speeds with traffic. There was nothing to suggest he was being followed or was in any immediate distress. At 4:02 p.m., a witness named Carlos Medina was walking his dog near the intersection of 19th Avenue and Southern Avenue when he noticed a white work truck pulled over near the small cluster of businesses that included a tire shop, a Mexican restaurant, and a check-cashing store. Carlos didn't think much of it at first. Work trucks were common in this light industrial area. The truck was just sitting there with the engine running, Carlos told police during his interview. "I remember thinking the guy must be on a phone call or checking his GPS or something. You see that all the time." But as Carlos and his dog, a small terrier named Buddy, made their way around the block, something caught his attention. There was another vehicle, a dark-colored sedan, parked about 50 feet behind the work truck. Carlos couldn't see much detail about the car or its occupants due to the distance and the bright afternoon sun reflecting off the windshield. When Carlos and Buddy completed their loop and came back to the same intersection about 15 minutes later, both vehicles were gone. At 4:08 p.m., Milton's phone registered its final ping, this one from the cell tower closest to 19th Avenue and Southern. After that, the phone either lost power or was deliberately turned off. Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator assigned to the case, spent weeks analyzing the significance of this location. The intersection of 19th Avenue and Southern sits in a part of Phoenix that's neither residential nor heavily commercial. It's a transitional area where small businesses mix with vacant lots and the occasional apartment complex. There are fewer security cameras here than in other parts of the city, and foot traffic is minimal except during rush hour. It's the kind of place someone might choose if they wanted to have a conversation away from prying eyes, Detective Santos noted in her case files. But it's also the kind of place where something bad could happen without many witnesses. The area around 19th and Southern has a history that made investigators particularly concerned. Over the years, several crimes had occurred in this vicinity, drug deals gone wrong, robberies, and twice in the past decade, homicides. The wide, busy street offered multiple escape routes, and the mix of businesses meant that strangers weren't particularly noteworthy. Milton's wife Sarah became worried when he didn't come home for dinner at 6 p.m. This was unusual for Milton, who was punctual to a fault and always called if he was going to be late. When he didn't answer his phone, Sarah called the auto repair shop's main office, but they confirmed that Milton had finished his scheduled work for the day. By 8 p.m., Sarah had called Milton's phone 17 times, each call going straight to voicemail. She contacted Milton's brother, his two closest friends, and even reached out to Roberto Martinez at the Grand Avenue shop, but no one had heard from him since earlier that afternoon. At 9:15 p.m., Sarah called the Phoenix Police Department to report her husband missing. The Phoenix Police Department's initial response to Sarah's missing person report was, unfortunately, fairly routine. Adults go missing in a city of 1.7 million people more often than most residents realize, and the vast majority return home within 24 hours with explanations ranging from medical emergencies to marital problems to simple miscommunication. Officer Jennifer Hayes took Sarah's call and filled out the standard missing person report. She noted that Milton was a 35-year-old Hispanic male, 5 feet 10 inches, approximately 180 pounds, last seen wearing a blue work shirt with his company logo, dark jeans, and steel-toed boots. His vehicle was described as a white 2019 Ford F-150 with company decals and Arizona license plate number that would soon become very familiar to law enforcement throughout the Phoenix metro area. The first 12 hours of the investigation followed standard procedure. Officers contacted hospitals, checked accident reports, and put out a BOLO, be on the lookout, alert for Milton's vehicle. Sarah provided them with a list of people who might know Milton's whereabouts, including family members, co-workers, and friends. It was Detective Maria Santos who first sensed that this case might be more serious than a typical missing person situation. Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Phoenix PD, had developed an instinct for cases that felt different from the routine. Something about the circumstances of Milton's disappearance, the mysterious phone call, the deviation from his normal route, the sudden cessation of phone activity, suggested this wasn't a case of someone voluntarily walking away from their life. On March 11, at approximately 2:30 p.m., nearly 24 hours after Milton was last seen alive, a landscaping crew working in a vacant lot near 19th Avenue and Southern Avenue made a discovery that would transform a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The vacant lot sat behind a row of small businesses, an area used primarily for overflow parking and occasional dumping of construction debris. The landscaping crew, hired by the property owner to clear weeds and prepare the lot for development, was using a small bulldozer to level the ground when operator Manuel Rodriguez noticed something that didn't belong. "At first I thought it was just garbage," Rodriguez later told police. "You find all kinds of stuff in these lots, old furniture, appliances, construction waste. But when I got closer, I realized it was a person." Milton Ayers was found lying face down in a shallow depression in the earth, partially concealed by tumbleweeds and debris that had blown against his body. He was still wearing his blue work shirt and dark jeans. His steel-toed boots were missing. The Maricopa County Medical Examiner would later determine that Milton had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, fired from close range with what appeared to be a small-caliber handgun. The trajectory of the bullet and the lack of defensive wound suggested that Milton had been caught completely off guard, possibly while walking away from his attacker or while kneeling. Detective Santos arrived at the scene within minutes of the 911 call. As she surveyed the area where Milton's body had been discovered, several details immediately caught her attention. The location was less than 200 yards from where Carlos Medina had seen the white work truck parked the previous afternoon. Milton's company truck was nowhere to be found. The positioning of the body suggested that Milton had not been killed at this location. There was minimal blood evidence at the scene, and the way his body was arranged indicated he had been moved after death. Someone had taken considerable effort to conceal the body, choosing a location where it might not have been discovered for weeks or even months if not for the scheduled landscaping work. Most puzzling of all, Milton's wallet was still in his back pocket, containing $127 in cash and all of his credit cards. His wedding ring remained on his finger. His work tools, which would have had considerable resale value, were missing along with his truck, but there was no evidence of a robbery gone wrong. Within hours of discovering Milton's body, the Phoenix Police Department launched a full-scale homicide investigation. Detective Santos was joined by Detective Robert Chen, a specialist in vehicular crimes, and Detective Lisa Hernandez, who focused on the forensic evidence that might help identify Milton's killer. The first major break came when Milton's company truck was located just before midnight on March 11. A security guard at a shopping center near 35th Avenue and Thomas Road, about 8 miles from where Milton's body was found, noticed the white F-150 parked in a corner of the lot that was supposed to be off-limits to customers. The truck had been sitting there since at least 6 p.m. the previous evening, according to the guard's log. Detective Chen processed the vehicle methodically. The truck appeared to have been wiped down, with cleaning supplies evident in the cab and an unusual absence of fingerprints on surfaces that should have been covered with them. However, the killer had made one crucial mistake. They had missed a small area on the inside of the driver's side door handle where a partial fingerprint remained. The forensics team also found traces of blood in the truck bed, despite obvious attempts to clean it. DNA analysis would later confirm that this blood belonged to Milton Ayers, supporting the theory that his body had been transported in his own vehicle before being dumped in the vacant lot. Perhaps most intriguingly, the truck's GPS system had been disabled, and someone had attempted to remove the dash cam that Milton's company had installed in all their vehicles. The attempt was unsuccessful, but the camera's memory card was missing. Detective Santos began the painstaking process of retracing Milton's life, looking for anyone who might have wanted him dead. She interviewed dozens of people, family members, co-workers, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances from Milton's past. What emerged was a portrait of a man who seemed to have few enemies. Milton and Sarah had been married for 8 years, and by all accounts, their relationship was stable and loving. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist, and together they lived modestly but comfortably. They had no children but had been discussing starting a family in the near future. Milton's work record was exemplary. His supervisor, Patricia Wong, described him as reliable, honest, and well-liked by everyone he worked with. There had never been any conflicts with co-workers, no workplace disputes, and no history of problems with customers or vendors. The family interviews revealed Milton to be a devoted son and brother. His parents, Elena and Francisco Ayers, had emigrated from Mexico in the 1970s and built a successful small business selling traditional Mexican food from a truck that operated in various Phoenix neighborhoods. Milton often helped with the family business on weekends, and there were no known family conflicts or financial disputes. However, Detective Santos's investigation did uncover one area of Milton's life that seemed potentially significant: his relationship with his younger brother, Diego. Diego Ayers, 28, had a history that contrasted sharply with Milton's steady, conventional life. Over the past decade, Diego had been arrested 3 times, twice for drug possession and once for assault following a bar fight. While he had never been convicted of any serious felonies, Diego ran with a crowd that Phoenix police knew well: young men involved in low-level drug dealing, petty theft, and occasional violence. Milton had consistently tried to help his brother get his life on track. He had bailed Diego out of jail, helped him find legitimate employment, and even let Diego stay at his home during periods when Diego was trying to get clean. But according to family members, the relationship had become strained in recent months. The story of the Ayers brothers is one that Detective Santos had encountered in various forms throughout her career: the good son and the troubled son, bound by blood but separated by the choices they made in life. As she dug deeper into the family dynamics, a more complex picture began to emerge. Elena Ayers, the brother's mother, was initially reluctant to discuss Diego's problems with the police. In her interview, conducted in Spanish with a translator present, she insisted that despite his troubles, Diego loved Milton and would never hurt him. But as Detective Santos pressed gently for details, Elena revealed information that cast Diego's relationship with Milton in a different light. 3 weeks before Milton's murder, coincidentally, around the same time that the prepaid phone used to call Milton was purchased, Diego had approached Milton asking for money. Not a small amount for rent or groceries, but $15,000 that Diego claimed he needed urgently to pay off a debt. Milton had refused. According to Elena, this refusal had led to the worst argument the brothers had ever had. Diego had accused Milton of thinking he was better than his family, of forgetting where he came from now that he had a stable job and a nice house. Milton, usually patient with his brother's problems, had finally lost his temper and told Diego that he was tired of cleaning up his messes. Diego left very angry that night, Elena told Detective Santos through tears. He said things I don't like to remember. He said Milton would be sorry for treating him like he was nothing. The argument had occurred at the family home during what was supposed to be a celebration of Elena's birthday. Other family members confirmed the confrontation, describing it as shocking because Milton rarely raised his voice and had never before refused to help Diego when he was in serious trouble. Francisco Ayres, the brother's father, provided additional context that made the argument even more significant. The $15,000 that Diego needed wasn't for a debt to a landlord or a legitimate creditor. Francisco believed, based on things Diego had said and people he'd been seen with, that his younger son owed money to individuals involved in Phoenix's drug trade. Milton knew that giving Diego that money wouldn't solve the problem, Francisco explained to Detective Santos. It would just make Diego think he could keep living the same way, getting into trouble and expecting his family to save him. Detective Santos attempted to locate Diego for questioning, but discovered that he had left Phoenix the day after Milton's murder. His last known address was a small apartment near 27th Avenue and Indian School Road, but the landlord said Diego had moved out suddenly, leaving behind most of his belongings and forfeiting his security deposit. Diego's phone had been disconnected, and attempts to trace him through social media or known associates were unsuccessful. It was as if he had simply vanished from Phoenix, leaving behind only questions and suspicions. The investigation took another significant turn when Detective Hernandez's analysis of the partial fingerprint found in Milton's truck came back with surprising results. The print didn't belong to Diego Ayres or to anyone in the immediate family. Instead, it matched someone named Marcus Rivera, a 32-year-old Phoenix resident with a criminal history that included armed robbery, aggravated assault, and suspected involvement in several unsolved homicides. Rivera was known to police as an enforcer for various criminal enterprises, someone who specialized in collecting debts and intimidating people who owed money to the wrong individuals. His arrest record showed a pattern of violence that escalated over time, and detectives suspected he had been involved in at least 3 murders, though they had never been able to prove it. The connection between Rivera and the Ayres family became clearer when Detective Santos discovered that Rivera had been seen with Diego at a bar near downtown Phoenix just 2 weeks before Milton's murder. Security camera footage from the bar showed the two men in what appeared to be an intense conversation, with Rivera doing most of the talking while Diego listened and nodded. The search for Marcus Rivera became the focus of a multi-agency manhunt that stretched across Arizona and into neighboring states. Rivera's photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the Southwest, and his known associates were placed under surveillance. Detective Santos theorized that Diego Ayres had made a deal with Rivera. In exchange for help collecting the money Diego owed, Rivera would receive information about Milton's schedule, movements, and habits. The mysterious phone call Milton received on the day of his murder may have been Diego luring his brother to the meeting that would cost Milton his life. But as the investigation continued, the case took yet another unexpected turn. On March 28, 18 days after Milton's murder, Rivera's body was found in a remote area of the Sonoran Desert, about 40 miles south of Phoenix. He had been shot execution-style, with multiple gunshot wounds suggesting that his killing was personal and methodical. Rivera's murder created more questions than it answered. If he had killed Milton Ayres, who had killed him? And why? Detective Santos began to consider the possibility that Milton's murder was part of a larger criminal conspiracy, one that involved debts, betrayals, and ultimately, a series of killings designed to eliminate witnesses and loose ends. The investigation revealed that Rivera had been working for a criminal organization that controlled drug distribution in several Phoenix neighborhoods. This organization, led by a man known only as El Jeef, was known for its brutal enforcement of debts and its policy of eliminating anyone who might cooperate with law enforcement. If Diego Ayres had indeed set up his brother's murder to pay off his own debts, he may have signed his own death warrant in the process. Criminal organizations rarely trust people who betray their own family members, seeing such individuals as fundamentally unreliable and dangerous. As Detective Santos prepared her final report on the Milton Ayres case, she faced the frustrating reality that often characterizes unsolved homicides. She had a theory that made sense of most of the evidence, but she lacked the definitive proof needed to make arrests or bring the case to trial. Diego Ayres remained missing, possibly dead, having fled Phoenix and disappeared into the vast network of people who live outside the reach of law enforcement. The criminal organization that may have ordered Milton's murder continued to operate, protected by fear, silence, and the code of street justice that values loyalty above law. Milton's truck had been processed for every possible piece of evidence, but aside from Rivera's fingerprint, the physical evidence was limited. The murder weapon was never found. The missing dash cam memory card could have contained crucial information, but it had vanished along with Diego. Sarah Ayres continues to live in the house she shared with Milton, though she has considered moving away from Phoenix and the memories that seem to follow her through the familiar streets. She maintains that Diego would never have hurt Milton deliberately, but acknowledges that her brother-in-law's problems may have indirectly led to her husband's death. The case remains officially open, though active investigation has been scaled back. Detective Santos checks periodically for new information, follows up on tips from the public, and hopes that someone with knowledge of what really happened on March 10, 2024, will eventually find the courage to come forward. In the desert southwest, the sun sets quickly, transforming the landscape from brilliant color to deep shadow in a matter of minutes. The case of Milton Ayres is like that sunset, clear and bright in some places, mysterious and dark in others, full of shadows that may never be fully illuminated. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, remember Milton Ayres, a good man who tried to help his troubled brother, who worked hard and loved his wife, and who died because someone decided his life was worth less than the money they hoped to gain. His story reminds us that evil often wears a familiar face, and that the people we trust most have the power to hurt us most deeply. The Phoenix desert keeps many secrets beneath its silent sands. The truth about what happened to Milton Ayres may be one of them, waiting for the right moment, the right person, or the right piece of evidence to finally bring it into the light. Story 5. The small coastal town of Lighthouse Point, Maine, had always prided itself on being the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. With a year-round population of just under 3,000 people, it was the sort of community where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick, where the local diner served as an unofficial town hall, and where the biggest excitement usually centered around the annual Lobster Festival each August. But in the early morning hours of September 15, 2023, Lighthouse Point became the center of a mystery that would challenge everything its residents thought they knew about their quiet community. It was a case that would reveal hidden secrets, test lifelong friendships, and leave investigators questioning whether they truly understood what had happened on that foggy September night. Tonight, I want to also tell you about the disappearance of Becca Morrison, a 34-year-old marine biologist whose vanishing would expose a web of deception, environmental crime, and small-town corruption that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. This is a story about what happens when someone gets too close to the truth in a place where truth can be dangerous. It's about the price of integrity and the length some people will go to protect their secrets. Rebecca Morrison had come to Lighthouse Point 3 years earlier with the kind of enthusiasm that only outsiders bring to small Maine towns. She had grown up in Burlington, Vermont, the daughter of 2 college professors who had instilled in her a deep love of learning and an unwavering commitment to environmental protection. After completing her PhD in marine biology at the University of Maine, Becca had been offered positions at several prestigious research institutions. But she chose instead to accept a role with the Maine Department of Marine Resources, specifically requesting assignment to the state's most remote coastal monitoring station in Lighthouse Point. Her colleagues thought she was crazy. The Lighthouse Point station was understaffed, underfunded, and largely forgotten by the bureaucrats in Augusta. Previous marine biologists assigned there had typically used it as a stepping stone to better positions, staying just long enough to gain field experience before moving on to more prestigious postings. But Becca was different. She fell in love with the rugged coastline, the complex ecosystem of tidal pools and offshore waters, and the tight-knit community that had been shaped by generations of fishing families. She rented a small cottage on Harbor Street, just a 5-minute walk from the Marine Research Station, and quickly became a familiar figure around town. The locals were initially skeptical of the young scientist with her fancy equipment and university credentials. Lighthouse Point had a long history of conflict with government regulators, and many residents viewed any official presence with suspicion. The fishing industry that supported most of the town's economy had been under increasing pressure from environmental regulations, and some residents blamed scientists like Becca for their economic struggles. But Becca's approach was different from previous researchers. Instead of conducting her studies in isolation, she made an effort to engage with the community. She attended town meetings, volunteered at the local elementary school's science fair, and most importantly, she listened to the fishermen who had been working these waters for decades. Captain Robert "Bobby" Henley, a third-generation lobsterman who operated one of the town's most successful fishing operations, initially viewed Becca with deep suspicion. But her genuine interest in understanding the local ecosystem, combined with her respect for the knowledge possessed by experienced fishermen, gradually won him over. She wasn't like the other government people who'd come through, Bobby would later tell investigators. She actually cared about what we had to say. She understood that we knew these waters better than anyone. Becca's work at the monitoring station focused on tracking the health of the coastal ecosystem, particularly the impact of climate change on local fish populations and marine habitats. Her research was meticulous and groundbreaking, documenting changes in water temperature, acidity levels, and species distribution that were occurring along the main coast. But it was her secondary area of research that would ultimately put her in danger. Becca had become increasingly concerned about pollution sources affecting the marine environment around Lighthouse Point. Her water samples were showing elevated levels of industrial chemicals that shouldn't have been present in such a pristine coastal area. The contamination was subtle, not dramatic enough to cause immediate visible damage, but persistent and potentially devastating to marine life over the long term. The chemicals she was detecting suggested industrial runoff, but there were no major industrial facilities anywhere near Lighthouse Point. Becca began investigating potential sources of the contamination, a process that required her to expand her research beyond the immediate coastal waters. She started taking samples from streams and groundwater sources throughout the region, mapping the contamination patterns to try to identify their origin. Her investigation led her to focus on a large property development project about 15 miles inland from the town. Pinnacle Holdings, a Boston-based development company, was in the process of building an exclusive resort and residential community called Pine Harbor Estates on 2,000 acres of previously undeveloped forest land. The development had been controversial from the beginning. Environmental groups had opposed the project, arguing that it would disrupt sensitive wildlife habitats and potentially contaminate groundwater that fed into coastal streams. But Pinnacle Holdings had deep pockets and influential political connections, and they had successfully navigated the permitting process despite organized opposition. Local residents were divided about Pine Harbor Estates. Some saw it as an economic opportunity that would bring jobs and tax revenue to the region. Others worried about the impact on their traditional way of life and the environment that supported their livelihoods. Becca's water quality data suggested that the environmental concerns had been justified. The contamination patterns she was documenting seemed to originate from the Pine Harbor Estates construction site, indicating that proper environmental safeguards were not being followed. But proving this connection would require access to the development site itself, something that Pinnacle Holdings was unlikely to permit. The company had hired private security to patrol the property and had been aggressive in pursuing legal action against anyone they considered to be trespassing. Undeterred, Becca began documenting her findings in a comprehensive report that she planned to submit to state environmental authorities. She knew that her research could potentially halt the Pine Harbor Estates project, costing Pinnacle Holdings millions of dollars and affecting the livelihoods of many local residents who were employed in the construction. What Becca didn't realize was that her investigation had attracted the attention of people who would go to any lengths to protect their interests. In a small town like Lighthouse Point, word traveled fast, and there were people with significant financial stakes in ensuring that her research never saw the light of day. As summer turned to fall in 2023, several residents noticed that Becca seemed more stressed than usual. She was working longer hours at the research station, often staying late into the evening to analyze samples and compile data. Her usually cheerful demeanor had been replaced by a focused intensity that suggested she was under considerable pressure. Dr. James Patterson, who served as Becca's supervisor at the Maine Department of Marine Resources, later recalled that she had requested additional security for her research data during a phone call in early September. She said she was concerned about potential interference with her work, Dr. Patterson told investigators. She wanted to make sure her findings were preserved even if something happened to her equipment or workspace. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious, but I approved her request to upload backup copies of her data to our secure servers. Becca's landlord, Martha Cruz, noticed that Becca had been receiving more visitors than usual in the weeks before her disappearance. Several times, Martha had seen unfamiliar cars parked outside Becca's cottage, including expensive vehicles that seemed out of place in the modest neighborhood. She seemed nervous, Martha later told police. She asked me if I had noticed anyone watching her house. I thought she was being paranoid, but now I wonder if she had good reason to be worried. The last person to have a substantial conversation with Becca was her closest friend in town, Lisa Chen, who worked as a nurse at the local medical clinic. Lisa and Becca had bonded over their shared status as educated professional women in a community where such individuals were relatively rare. On the evening of September 14, just hours before her disappearance, Becca had called Lisa and asked if they could meet for coffee the next morning. During the call, Becca seemed agitated and mentioned that she had finally found the smoking gun that would prove the source of the coastal contamination. She said she had evidence that would expose what was really happening at Pine Harbor Estates, Lisa recalled. She seemed excited but also scared. She asked me if I thought she should contact the FBI directly instead of going through normal state channels. Lisa advised Becca to follow proper procedures and report her findings to her supervisor first. It was advice that Lisa would later deeply regret, wondering if a different recommendation might have saved her friend's life. That night, Becca worked late at the Marine Research Station, organizing her data and preparing what she told colleagues would be her most important report yet. Security cameras at the facility showed her leaving at 11:47 p.m., carrying a briefcase and appearing to look around nervously as she walked to her car. It was the last time Rebecca Morrison was seen alive. September 15, 2023, dawned gray and foggy in Lighthouse Point, the kind of thick coastal fog that could reduce visibility to just a few feet and muffle sound until the world seemed wrapped in cotton. It was weather that locals were accustomed to, but visitors often found disorienting and unsettling. Lisa Chen arrived at the Harbor View Cafe at 8 a.m., expecting to find Becca already there with her usual order of black coffee and a blueberry muffin. But Becca's customary corner table was empty, and she was nowhere to be seen. Lisa waited for 20 minutes before calling Becca's cell phone. The call went straight to voicemail, which was unusual. Becca was typically meticulous about keeping her phone charged and answering calls promptly. Growing concerned, Lisa walked the short distance to Becca's cottage on Harbor Street. Becca's car, a red Honda Civic, was parked in its usual spot in front of the house. But when Lisa knocked on the door, there was no response. Martha Cruz, the landlord, lived in the main house on the same property and had a key to Becca's cottage. After Lisa explained her concerns, Martha agreed to check inside. What they found was deeply unsettling. The cottage appeared to have been searched, though not ransacked. Furniture had been moved slightly, drawers were not quite closed properly, and papers on Becca's desk had been disturbed. It was the kind of subtle disruption that might not be noticed by a casual observer, but was obvious to someone familiar with Becca's orderly habits. More concerning was what was missing. Becca's laptop computer was gone, along with several file folders that she typically kept on her desk. Her briefcase, which Martha had seen her carrying the previous evening, was nowhere to be found. But perhaps most telling was what remained. Becca's purse was still on the kitchen counter, containing her wallet, credit cards, and over $200 in cash. Her keys were hanging on their usual hook by the door. These were not items that someone would leave behind if departing voluntarily. Lisa immediately called the Lighthouse Point Police Department, a small force consisting of Chief Daniel Murphy and 2 part-time officers. Chief Murphy, a 25-year veteran of law enforcement who had been born and raised in the town, responded personally to the call. Chief Murphy's initial assessment was cautious. Adults had the right to leave if they chose, and there was no immediate evidence of foul play. But the condition of the cottage and the missing research material suggested that something more serious might have occurred. The investigation began with interviews of Becca's neighbors and colleagues. What emerged was a picture of a woman who had been under increasing stress but had given no indication that she planned to leave town. Tom Bradley, who lived across the street from Becca's cottage, told police that he had heard a car engine running outside his house around 2 a.m. on September 15. The sound had woken him up, which was unusual because the neighborhood was typically very quiet at night. "I looked out my window, but with the fog, I couldn't see much," Tom explained. "I thought I saw taillights, but I can't be sure." The engine sound seemed louder than usual, like maybe it was a truck or SUV instead of a regular car. At the Marine Research Station, Becca's colleagues were shocked by her disappearance. The facility's security system showed that no one had entered the building after Becca left the previous evening, but her research materials and computer equipment had been removed from her office. Dr. Sarah Kim, a fellow marine biologist who worked closely with Becca, noticed that specific files related to the Pine Harbor Estates investigation were missing, while other research projects remained untouched. "It wasn't random theft," Dr. Kim told Chief Murphy. "Someone knew exactly what they were looking for and took only the materials related to Becca's pollution investigation." Chief Murphy contacted the Maine State Police and requested assistance with the investigation. Detective Raymond Torres, a specialist in missing persons cases, arrived in Lighthouse Point that afternoon and immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. Detective Torres began by examining Becca's phone records and credit card activity. Her cell phone had last connected to a tower at 12:23 a.m. on September 15, about 30 minutes after she left the research station. After that, the phone had either been turned off or destroyed. There had been no activity on her credit cards or bank accounts since September 14, which was inconsistent with voluntary departure. Someone planning to leave would typically access funds or make purchases for travel. The investigation expanded to include canvas interviews with every resident of Harbor Street and the surrounding neighborhoods. Several people reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the area during the previous week, including a black SUV with tinted windows that had been parked on various streets at different times. Mrs. Eleanor Winters, an elderly resident who spent much of her time watching the neighborhood from her living room window, provided the most detailed description. "It was one of those expensive SUVs, maybe a Cadillac or Lincoln," she told Detective Torres. "It had Massachusetts plates, I think, though I couldn't make out the exact numbers. I saw it at least 3 times over the past week, always with someone sitting inside like they were watching something." This information prompted Detective Torres to contact the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles and request data on similar vehicles registered to individuals or companies that might have connections to the Lighthouse Point area. Meanwhile, the search for Becca herself was expanding. The Maine Warden Service deployed search teams along the coastal areas and inland trails where Becca was known to conduct research. Volunteer searchers from the community joined the effort, combing through forests and checking abandoned buildings. The Coast Guard launched boats to search the waters off Lighthouse Point, using sonar equipment to scan the ocean floor for any sign of Becca or evidence related to her disappearance. The timing was critical. If Becca had ended up in the water, either voluntarily or otherwise, the chances of recovery decreased significantly with each passing day. 3 days into the investigation, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Joey Martinez, a 16-year-old high school student who worked part-time at the local marina, came forward with information he had initially been reluctant to share. On the night of September 14th, Joey had been at the marina after hours, meeting friends for what he described as just hanging out. Around 1:30 a.m., he had seen a boat leaving the harbor without running lights, which was unusual and potentially dangerous in the foggy conditions. It was a big boat, maybe 40 feet long, Joey told Detective Torres. It looked like one of the charter fishing boats, but I couldn't tell which one in the fog. What was weird was that it was running silent, no lights, no radio chatter, nothing. That's not normal for someone heading out at night. The marina records showed that all registered boats were supposed to be accounted for, but Detective Torres discovered that at least 3 charter boat operators had keys to their vessels and could have taken them out without creating an official record. This led to interviews with the charter boat captains, all of whom claimed to have been home sleeping at the time in question. But one captain, Frank Morrison, no relation to Becca, seemed particularly nervous during his interview and provided contradictory information about his whereabouts. Frank Morrison operated Deep Water Charters, a business that took tourists on fishing and whale-watching expeditions. His boat, the Lighthouse Lady, was a 42-foot vessel that matched the general description provided by Joey Martinez. When Detective Torres examined the Lighthouse Lady, he found that it had been recently cleaned, unusually thoroughly for a working fishing boat. The deck had been scrubbed with bleach, and the interior showed signs of extensive cleaning that went beyond normal maintenance. Frank claimed he had cleaned the boat in preparation for a charter trip that had been cancelled due to weather, but his explanation seemed rehearsed and unconvincing. The investigation took another significant turn when Detective Torres received the results of his inquiry to Massachusetts motor vehicle records. A black Cadillac Escalade registered to Pinnacle Holdings had been issued multiple speeding tickets on Route 1 between Boston and the Lighthouse Point area during the week before Becca's disappearance. The driver's license associated with the tickets belonged to Vincent Caruso, who was listed as Director of Security for Pinnacle Holdings. Caruso had an extensive background in law enforcement and private security, including a controversial departure from the Boston Police Department several years earlier. When Detective Torres attempted to contact Caruso for an interview, Pinnacle Holdings attorneys immediately intervened, claiming that any questions related to their employee would need to be submitted through legal counsel. This response raised immediate red flags for Detective Torres. In his experience, innocent parties were typically cooperative with missing persons investigations, especially when the missing person was conducting research that might affect their business interests. The legal stonewalling by Pinnacle Holdings prompted Detective Torres to request assistance from the FBI, whose resources and jurisdiction would be necessary to investigate a potential kidnapping case that crossed state lines. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez of the FBI's Boston field office took charge of the federal aspects of the investigation. Agent Martinez had extensive experience with cases involving corporate malfeasance and environmental crimes, making her uniquely qualified to understand the potential motives behind Becca's disappearance. Agent Martinez's first action was to obtain federal warrants for Pinnacle Holdings' communications records and financial transactions. What she discovered would transform the case from a simple missing person investigation into a complex federal criminal probe. But as the investigation intensified and federal resources were deployed, the people responsible for Becca's disappearance were working to cover their tracks and eliminate any remaining evidence of their crimes. Time was running out, and everyone involved in the case knew that with each passing day, the chances of finding Becca Morrison alive were growing increasingly slim. The federal investigation into Becca Morrison's disappearance moved quickly once FBI resources were deployed. Special Agent Martinez assembled a team that included specialists in financial crimes, environmental violations, and organized criminal activity. What they uncovered was far more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. Pinnacle Holdings wasn't just a development company cutting corners on environmental regulations, they were the front for a sophisticated criminal organization that had been operating throughout New England for several years. The financial records obtained through federal warrants revealed a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent transactions. Pinnacle Holdings had been using the Pine Harbor Estates project as a money laundering operation, accepting investments from questionable sources and using construction contracts to clean illicit funds. But the environmental violations that had first attracted Becca's attention were just one small part of a much larger scheme. The contamination of coastal waters around Lighthouse Point wasn't accidental, it was the result of deliberate illegal dumping of industrial waste that Pinnacle Holdings was being paid to dispose of. Vincent Caruso, the security director whose vehicle had been spotted in the area, had a background that extended far beyond legitimate law enforcement. FBI databases revealed connections to organized crime families in Boston and New York, including previous investigations into racketeering and witness intimidation. The communications records from Pinnacle Holdings painted a disturbing picture of the company's response to Becca's investigation. Internal emails and text messages showed that executives had been tracking her research activities for months, using informants within the local community to monitor her progress. One email, sent by Pinnacle Holdings CEO Marcus Webb to Vincent Caruso on September 10, was particularly damning. The marine biologist is getting too close. Handle this situation before it becomes a bigger problem. Use whatever resources are necessary. Agent Martinez immediately issued federal warrants for the arrest of Webb, Caruso, and several other Pinnacle Holdings executives. But when FBI agents arrived at the company's Boston headquarters, they found that the key figures had vanished. Webb's luxury apartment in Back Bay was empty, with signs of hasty departure. His bank accounts had been drained, and his passport was missing. Caruso had similarly disappeared, leaving behind only a cleaned-out office and a disconnected cell phone. The manhunt for the Pinnacle Holdings executives expanded to include international law enforcement agencies, as intelligence suggested the fugitives might have fled to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. But Agent Martinez knew that finding the executives was only part of the challenge. The more pressing concern was determining what had happened to Becca Morrison and whether she might still be alive. The investigation in Lighthouse Point intensified, with FBI forensic teams conducting detailed searches of locations connected to the case. The Marine Research Station was processed for DNA evidence, fingerprints, and any traces of struggle or violence. Becca's cottage was similarly examined, revealing evidence that confirmed the earlier suspicions about it being searched. Hidden cameras installed by the FBI's technical team had been triggered by someone entering the property after Becca's disappearance, but the intruder had been careful to avoid showing their face. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source, Joey Martinez, the teenager who had witnessed the boat leaving the marina without lights, came forward with additional information he had initially been afraid to share. Joey had been at the marina that night not just to hang out with friends, but to meet a girl he had been dating secretly. He had been reluctant to mention this detail because the girl was the daughter of Frank Morrison, the charter boat captain who had been acting suspiciously. "I saw Mr. Morrison's boat leave the harbor that night," Joey told Agent Martinez during a private interview. But the weird thing was, Mr. Morrison wasn't driving it. There were two other guys, and they had something heavy they were loading onto the boat before they left. This revelation led to increased scrutiny of Frank Morrison, whose alibis were becoming increasingly questionable under detailed FBI investigation. Phone records showed that Morrison had received several calls from Vincent Caruso in the days leading up to Becca's disappearance, calls that Morrison had initially denied receiving. When confronted with this evidence, Morrison's composure cracked. He admitted that he had been approached by Caruso with an offer to use his boat for what Caruso described as a small job that would pay very well and help protect local jobs. Morrison claimed he had been told that Becca was going to be relocated rather than harmed, and that her research was threatening the livelihoods of hundreds of construction workers employed on the Pine Harbor Estates project. They said she was going to be taken somewhere safe where she couldn't cause trouble, Morrison told investigators. "I never thought. I didn't think they were going to hurt her. I just needed the money." Morrison's cooperation led agents to the location where he had been instructed to take his boat on the night of September 15, a small, uninhabited island about 12 miles offshore from Lighthouse Point. Seal Island was a rocky outcropping that had once supported a small fishing community but had been abandoned for decades. The island was accessible only by boat and was rarely visited except by occasional lobstermen checking traps in the surrounding waters. FBI dive teams and forensic specialists were deployed to search Seal Island and the surrounding waters. What they found there would provide the answers that Becca's family and friends had been desperately seeking, but those answers would bring little comfort. On the island's rocky shore, investigators discovered evidence of recent activity that was inconsistent with the location's abandoned status. Fresh tire tracks from an ATV, recently disturbed soil, and traces of accelerant suggested that something had been burned there recently. More significantly, dive teams searching the waters around the island found Becca Morrison's briefcase, weighted down with chains and submerged in deep water off the island's north shore. The briefcase contained water-damaged but partially recoverable documents that confirmed the scope of Becca's investigation into Pinnacle Holdings' illegal activities. Her research had documented not just environmental violations, but evidence of the money laundering operation and connections to organized crime. Most importantly, the briefcase contained a hidden waterproof container with backup copies of all her research, along with a detailed letter explaining her fears and naming the individuals she believed were responsible for the criminal activity. "If something happens to me," Becca had written, "it will be because I got too close to the truth about Pinnacle Holdings and their criminal operation. Vincent Caruso threatened me directly, and I believe my life is in danger." The letter provided the evidence needed to file federal charges against the Pinnacle Holdings executives, even in their absence. Warrants were issued for murder, kidnapping, racketeering, and environmental crimes. But the most heartbreaking aspect of the discovery was what wasn't found. Becca Morrison's body was never recovered, despite extensive searches of Seal Island and the surrounding waters. The evidence suggested that Becca had been killed on the island and her remains disposed of in a way that would prevent their discovery. The perpetrators had been careful to eliminate physical evidence, leaving her family without the closure that comes with being able to lay a loved one to rest. Frank Morrison, facing federal charges for his role in the conspiracy, provided what details he could about the night of September 15th. He had transported Vincent Caruso and another unidentified man to Seal Island, along with what appeared to be an unconscious woman wrapped in blankets. "I never saw her face," Morrison told investigators, his voice breaking. "I kept telling myself that maybe she was just drugged, that they were going to let her go somewhere far away. But deep down, I knew what was really happening." Morrison's testimony helped establish the timeline and methods used in Becca's murder, but the exact details of what happened on Seal Island that night remained known only to the perpetrators. The investigation revealed that Becca Morrison had been killed not just because of her environmental research, but because she had uncovered evidence of a criminal conspiracy worth millions of dollars. Her dedication to protecting the marine environment had led her to discover crimes that extended far beyond illegal dumping. She had been a threat not just to a development project, but to an entire criminal organization that operated by intimidation and violence. In their world, people like Becca Morrison, honest, principled, and unwilling to be bought or intimidated, represented an existential threat that had to be eliminated. The case had revealed the deadly intersection of environmental crime, organized criminal activity, and small-town corruption. It showed how criminal organizations could exploit local economic pressures and environmental regulations to further their illegal activities. But perhaps most tragically, it demonstrated how someone's commitment to truth and justice could make them a target for violence in ways they never anticipated. As the FBI investigation deepened, the true scope of the criminal conspiracy that had cost Becca Morrison her life began to emerge. What had initially appeared to be a case of environmental crime and murder was revealed to be part of a much larger network of illegal activities spanning multiple states and involving dozens of conspirators. Special Agent Martinez's team discovered that Pinnacle Holdings was just one of several front companies operated by what federal prosecutors would later describe as a sophisticated racketeering enterprise that had been active throughout New England for over a decade. The organization specialized in what law enforcement termed environmental racketeering, using legitimate-seeming development and construction projects to facilitate money laundering, illegal waste disposal, and fraud. They targeted rural communities with limited law enforcement resources and exploited environmental regulations to create opportunities for corruption. Pine Harbor Estates was just the latest in a series of similar projects across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. In each case, the pattern was the same: acquire large tracts of undeveloped land, obtain development permits through political influence and bribery, then use the construction phase to launder money and dispose of illegal waste. The environmental damage caused by these operations was extensive and long-lasting. Federal environmental investigators found evidence of groundwater contamination, illegal dumping, and destruction of protected habitats across multiple sites. But the human cost was equally significant. The investigation revealed that Becca Morrison was not the first person to be killed for threatening the organization's operations. In 2019, an environmental lawyer in New Hampshire who had been investigating similar illegal dumping had died in what was officially ruled a hiking accident. In 2021, a local newspaper reporter in Vermont who had been investigating suspicious development projects had been killed in a hit-and-run accident that was never solved. Federal investigators now believe these deaths were connected to the same criminal organization that had killed Becca Morrison. The pattern suggested a systematic campaign to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their operations. The investigation also revealed the extent of corruption within local and state government agencies. Several officials had been receiving regular payments in exchange for expediting permits, ignoring environmental violations, and suppressing investigations. In Maine, the scandal reached into the state environmental agency itself, where officials responsible for monitoring water quality and enforcing environmental regulations had been compromised. This corruption explained how Pinnacle Holdings had been able to operate for so long without detection by regulatory authorities. The financial records obtained by federal investigators showed payments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars to government officials, police officers, and even some environmental activists who had been bought off to prevent organized opposition to the projects. The case also exposed how the organization recruited local residents to serve as informants and accomplices. In Lighthouse Point, several residents had been receiving payments for providing information about Becca's activities and research. These revelations devastated the tight-knit community, as neighbors discovered that people they had trusted for years had been working for the criminal organization. The social fabric of the town was torn apart by suspicion and betrayal. Chief Daniel Murphy, who had initially handled Becca's missing person case, was forced to confront the possibility that corruption within his own small police department might have contributed to the tragedy. Several part-time officers had received unexplained payments from shell companies connected to Pinnacle Holdings. The investigation revealed that Becca's research activities had been monitored almost from the moment she began investigating the coastal contamination. Her phone calls had been intercepted, her computer had been hacked, and her movements had been tracked by a network of paid informants. Despite this surveillance, Becca had managed to gather extensive evidence of the criminal conspiracy by using secure communication methods and storing her research in multiple locations. Her scientific training had included instruction in data security, knowledge that had helped preserve the evidence needed to expose the organization. The international manhunt for the fugitive Pinnacle Holdings executives continued, with authorities tracking financial transactions and communications across multiple countries. Marcus Webb was eventually located in a non-extradition country, but Vincent Caruso remained at large. Caruso was believed to be the organization's primary enforcer, responsible for intimidation, violence, and elimination of threats. His background included military training and connections to international criminal networks, making him particularly dangerous and difficult to locate. The FBI issued a substantial reward for information leading to Caruso's capture, and his photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies worldwide. But investigators believed he had access to multiple false identities and significant financial resources, enabling him to remain hidden indefinitely. Meanwhile, the environmental cleanup efforts at Pine Harbor Estates and other contaminated sites would require years and millions of dollars. The full extent of the environmental damage was still being assessed, but preliminary estimates suggested that some areas might never fully recover. The legal proceedings against the organization's members who had been captured or who agreed to cooperate became one of the largest federal prosecution efforts in Maine's history. Dozens of individuals faced charges ranging from racketeering and money laundering to murder and environmental crimes. Frank Morrison, the charter boat captain who had cooperated with investigators, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. But he would spend the rest of his life knowing that his actions had contributed to Becca Morrison's death. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had just said no," Morrison told a federal judge during his sentencing hearing. "Maybe she'd still be alive. Maybe all of this could have been prevented." The case prompted significant changes in how environmental crimes are investigated and prosecuted. Federal agencies increased coordination to identify patterns of illegal activity across jurisdictions, and new resources were allocated to protecting environmental researchers and activists who might be targeted by criminal organizations. Becca Morrison's research methods and security protocols became a model for other scientists working in areas where their findings might threaten powerful interests. Her story was used in training programs to help researchers understand the potential risks of their work and take appropriate precautions. But for her family and friends, no amount of legal justice or policy change could fill the void left by her absence. Carmen Morrison, Becca's mother, established a foundation to support marine research and environmental protection, ensuring that her daughter's work would continue. Becca died because she refused to look the other way when she discovered something wrong, Carmen said during a memorial service held at the Lighthouse Point Marine Research Station. She knew the risks, but she believed that the truth was worth fighting for, even if it cost her everything. The foundation provided grants to young scientists conducting environmental research and funded enhanced security measures for researchers working in areas where their findings might make them targets for retaliation. Dr. James Patterson, Becca's supervisor, implemented new protocols for protecting researchers and their data, ensuring that important scientific work could continue even if something happened to the individual scientists conducting it. "Becca's research lives on," Dr. Patterson said. "The truth she died to reveal is now part of the public record, and it's helping to prevent similar crimes from occurring in the future." But the most lasting impact of Becca Morrison's story was the reminder it provided about the courage required to speak truth to power, and the price that courageous people sometimes pay for their principles. 2 years have passed since Becca Morrison disappeared from Lighthouse Point, and the small coastal community continues to grapple with the aftermath of the revelations that followed her death. The town that had once prided itself on being a quiet, safe haven where everyone knew each other had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about corruption, betrayal, and violence. The Pine Harbor Estates development site has been abandoned, its partially constructed buildings standing as monuments to the criminal conspiracy that once operated there. Environmental cleanup efforts continue, supervised by federal agencies and funded by assets seized from the criminal organization. The site has become an unlikely pilgrimage destination for environmental activists and true crime enthusiasts, drawn by the story of the marine biologist who gave her life to expose the truth. A small memorial near the entrance honors Becca's sacrifice, though many locals wish the constant stream of visitors would allow their community to heal in peace. The Lighthouse Point Marine Research Station has been renamed the Rebecca Morrison Center for Coastal Environmental Studies. The facility has been expanded and modernized, with enhanced security systems and new protocols for protecting researchers who investigate sensitive environmental issues. Dr. Sarah Kim, Becca's former colleague, now serves as the center's director. She has made it her mission to continue the work that Becca began, using advanced monitoring equipment to track pollution sources and document environmental crimes throughout the Maine coast. "Every day, I think about what Becca would want us to do," Dr. Kim reflects. "She wouldn't want us to be paralyzed by fear. She'd want us to keep fighting for the truth, but to do it smarter and safer." The center has developed partnerships with law enforcement agencies and environmental groups across New England, creating a network of researchers who share information and provide mutual support when investigating potentially dangerous situations. The legal aftermath of the case continues to unfold in courts across multiple states. 47 individuals have been charged in connection with the racketeering conspiracy, including corrupt government officials, construction company executives, and local accomplices who facilitated the criminal activities. Marcus Webb, the Pinnacle Holdings CEO who fled to a non-extradition country, has been fighting extradition requests for over a year. International pressure has mounted on the country harboring him, but diplomatic efforts to secure his return have been complicated by geopolitical considerations beyond the scope of the criminal case. Vincent Caruso remains at large, and the FBI continues to pursue leads about his whereabouts. Several reported sightings across different continents have proven false, and investigators believe he may have undergone plastic surgery to alter his appearance. The $2 million reward for information leading to Caruso's capture has generated thousands of tips, but none have resulted in his apprehension. He has become something of a folk villain in true crime circles, with amateur investigators following every rumor and social media post that might provide clues to his location. For the Morrison family, the passage of time has not diminished their grief, but it has allowed them to find meaning in their loss through advocacy and education. Carmen Morrison's foundation has awarded over $500,000 in grants to young environmental scientists, with a particular focus on supporting researchers from rural and underserved communities. The foundation also sponsors an annual symposium on research ethics and safety, bringing together scientists, law enforcement officials, and security experts. Becca always said that science belongs to everyone, Carmen explains. She believed that the people who are most affected by environmental problems should have access to the tools and knowledge needed to address them. The symposium has become a premier event in the environmental research community, attracting participants from around the world who come to learn about the latest developments in research security and environmental crime investigation. One of the most significant outcomes of Becca's case has been the establishment of new federal programs to protect environmental researchers and whistleblowers. The Rebecca Morrison Environmental Researcher Protection Act, passed by Congress in 2024, provides federal resources for threat assessment, security training, and witness protection for scientists whose work might expose them to retaliation. The legislation also created new criminal penalties for intimidating or harming environmental researchers, and established specialized FBI units trained to investigate crimes against scientists and environmental activists. In Lighthouse Point itself, the healing process has been slow and uneven. Some residents have embraced the town's newfound notoriety, opening businesses catering to the steady stream of visitors drawn by Becca's story. Others resent the attention and wish the community could return to its former anonymity. The Harbor View Cafe, where Becca and Lisa Chen had planned to meet on the morning of September 15, has become an unofficial memorial site. Visitors often ask to sit at Becca's usual corner table, and the cafe's owner has placed a small plaque there honoring her memory. Lisa Chen, who was the last person to speak with Becca before her disappearance, has struggled with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that different advice might have changed the outcome of that final conversation. "I keep replaying that phone call," Lisa admits. "What if I had told her to go to the FBI immediately? What if I had offered to go with her? Would she still be alive?" Lisa has become an advocate for mental health support for families and communities affected by violent crime, recognizing that trauma extends far beyond the immediate victims to encompass entire networks of relationships and communities. Chief Daniel Murphy retired from the Lighthouse Point Police Department 6 months after Becca's disappearance, haunted by the knowledge that corruption within his own ranks had contributed to the tragedy. He has since worked as a consultant for small police departments, helping them develop protocols for detecting and preventing internal corruption. "I spent my whole career thinking I knew this community," Murphy reflects. "The hardest lesson was learning that I didn't know it at all. There were people I trusted who were working for criminals, and there were warning signs I should have recognized." The charter boat captain Frank Morrison served 18 months in federal prison before being released on supervised probation. He has struggled to rebuild his life in a community where many residents blame him for enabling Becca's murder. Morrison's boat, the Lighthouse Lady, was seized by federal authorities and eventually sold at auction. The new owner, a marine research organization, renamed it the Rebecca's Legacy, and uses it to conduct the kind of coastal monitoring work that Becca had been doing when she was killed. Joey Martinez, the teenager whose testimony helped break the case open, has gone on to study marine biology in college, inspired by Becca's example and committed to continuing her work. He plans to return to Maine after graduation to work at the Rebecca Morrison Center. She died because she cared about protecting the ocean, Joey says. The least I can do is try to carry on that work. The environmental cleanup at Pine Harbor Estates and other contaminated sites has made significant progress, though full restoration will take decades. The work has provided valuable insights into environmental remediation techniques and has helped establish new standards for cleanup operations at similar sites. Dr. Patterson, Becca's former supervisor, has noted that the scientific community has learned important lessons about the intersection of environmental research and criminal activity. Becca's case taught us that environmental crime is often connected to other serious criminal activities, Dr. Patterson explains. We now train our researchers to recognize these connections and to work more closely with law enforcement when they encounter suspicious situations. The case has also highlighted the vulnerability of rural communities to sophisticated criminal organizations that exploit limited law enforcement resources and economic pressures. Federal agencies have increased their presence in rural areas and developed better coordination mechanisms for investigating crimes that span multiple jurisdictions. For the scientific community, Becca Morrison's story serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale. Her dedication to uncovering the truth and protecting the environment exemplifies the highest ideals of scientific research, while her fate demonstrates the real-world risks that researchers sometimes face. Environmental science programs at universities across the country now include training on research security and threat assessment, ensuring that future scientists understand both the importance of their work and the potential risks involved. The Rebecca Morrison Foundation continues to grow, supporting not only scientific research but also educational programs that teach young people about environmental stewardship and the importance of speaking up when they witness wrongdoing. Carmen Morrison often speaks at schools and universities, sharing her daughter's story and encouraging students to pursue careers in environmental protection. Becca used to say that every generation has to decide what kind of world they want to leave for their children, Carmen tells her audiences. She made her choice, and it cost her everything. But the work she started continues, and the truth she died to reveal is making a difference. As the second anniversary of Becca's disappearance approaches, plans are underway for a permanent memorial at the Lighthouse Point Marine Research Station. The memorial will feature a bronze statue of Becca examining a water sample, surrounded by native plants that represent the coastal ecosystem she worked to protect. The inscription will read, Dr. Rebecca Morrison, scientist, protector, truth-teller. She gave her life so that others might know the truth. But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Becca Morrison is the continuing work of the researchers who have taken up her mission. Every water sample tested, every contamination source identified, every environmental crime exposed represents a victory for the principles she died defending. The coastal waters around Lighthouse Point are slowly recovering from the contamination that Becca first detected. Fish populations are beginning to rebound, and the ecosystem is showing signs of resilience that give hope for full restoration. Lisa Chen often walks along the shore in the early morning, when the fog rolls in from the ocean and the world seems wrapped in the same mystery that shrouded Becca's final night. She thinks about her friend's courage and commitment, and about the price of standing up for what's right in a world where the truth can be dangerous. Becca knew the risks, Lisa reflects. But she also knew that someone had to speak up. She couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent while the environment was being destroyed and people were being harmed. The story of the Lighthouse Point disappearance continues to resonate because it touches on fundamental questions about courage, integrity, and the responsibility we all bear to protect the world around us. Becca Morrison's legacy lives on in every scientist who refuses to look the other way, every community that stands up to corruption, and every person who chooses truth over comfort. In the end, the criminals who killed Becca Morrison succeeded in silencing her voice, but they could not silence her message. The truth she died to reveal continues to spread, inspiring others to take up the work of environmental protection and holding accountable those who would profit from the destruction of our natural world. The fog still rolls in from the ocean at Lighthouse Point, but it no longer carries the same sense of mystery and menace that it did on that September night in 2023. Now it seems to carry with it the memory of a woman who loved the sea and died defending it, a reminder that some truths are worth any sacrifice. As we conclude this story, Vincent Caruso remains at large, somewhere in the world, living under an assumed identity and looking over his shoulder every day. The FBI continues its search, and somewhere, someone knows where he is. Justice delayed is not justice denied, and the memory of Rebecca Morrison demands that those responsible for her death be held accountable. Until that day comes, her work continues in the hands of others, and her story serves as both warning and inspiration for anyone who would speak truth to power in defense of our shared environment. The lighthouse that gives the town its name still sends its beam across the dark waters each night, a symbol of guidance and hope that has weathered many storms. Like Becca Morrison's legacy, it stands as a beacon, calling people to safety and showing them the way home. The Lighthouse Point disappearance remains one of the most significant environmental crime cases in recent American history, not just for its tragic outcome, but for what it revealed about the intersection of environmental protection, organized crime, and small-town corruption. Today, the Rebecca Morrison Center for Coastal Environmental Studies continues its work monitoring the health of Maine's coastal waters. The center's researchers carry on Becca's mission with enhanced security protocols and the knowledge that their work is not just scientifically important, but sometimes dangerous. Vincent Caruso's capture remains one of the FBI's highest priorities, and the agency continues to pursue leads from around the world. When he is finally brought to justice, it will provide some measure of closure for Becca's family and the community of Lighthouse Point. But perhaps the most important legacy of this case is the reminder it provides that environmental protection is not just about preserving natural beauty or abstract ecosystems. It's about protecting human communities and standing up to those who would profit from destruction and corruption. Rebecca Morrison's story teaches us that the price of truth can be high, but that someone must be willing to pay it. In her memory, and in honor of the principles she died defending, the work continues. The lighthouse beam still sweeps across the waters of the Maine coast each night, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are those who will stand watch and guide others to safety. Like Becca Morrison herself, it serves as a beacon of hope in a sometimes dangerous world. This has been the story of the Lighthouse Point disappearance. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth is worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.